listening to the sweet sounds of the After Movie Diner. Support us at patreon.com/After Movie Diner. Or I'll punch you in the teats. Rate and review us on iTunes, Earthling. And now, here's your host, John Cross.
Podcasting, man, podcasting. I tell you what, I am feeling the love with podcasting. Well, indeed, with my sort of internet group of creative and film-loving friends. That's what I'm feeling it, man. I am absolutely feeling it. I'm buzzing with the idea of everyone out there doing podcasts and interviewing people and writing stuff about film and TV and coming up with their own stuff and creating stuff and all that. I'm just buzzing with it. I'm excited with it. And it might be because the guest today is someone who I met through that very medium, someone who loves film as much as I do, and probably more, someone who is an exceptional writer, someone who has a podcast of his own, which we get into the show, but also because recently on aftermoviediner.com, I put a little banner up on the homepage to alert people that we have a page on the site, aftermoviediner.com/friends, where we list all the podcasts and shows and websites and musicians that are friends of the After Movie Diner that have done stuff that we love, that has done stuff that has supported our show. And it's just our little corner of the internet to kind of give back to all these wonderful people who I get to chat to on a daily basis. So check out aftermoviediner.com/friends and then click around the podcasts and the websites and the music and things that you find there and be like, my goodness, who knew that the world was so diverse and beautiful and amazing and creative and funny and interesting and deep and varied? I did. It's all there, aftermoviediner.com/friends. Check it out. Also, I want to urge everybody to check out the ItMod podcast Chatcast. There is a link for that on aftermoviediner.com/friends. Our guest today is from that Chatcast. And I lay in bed this morning, couldn't sleep, and was listening to the Mark Maron interview with Bruce Dern. And it was fine. Bruce Dern's great. You could listen to Bruce Dern do anything. He's fascinating, got stories from 50-plus years of being in Hollywood. However, Mark Maron, not a particularly engaging interviewer. Even at his best, I'm listening to the show being like, you should have asked this. You should have said this. Why did that come up? Also, with the Bruce Dern interview, he seems to try and end it before it's done. Bruce is still going on. It's still got gold. And Mark Maron's like, well, I got to wrap this up. Why, Mark? Why? However, I listened to the ItMod Chatcast with Larry Fessenden. And my goodness, if that isn't an episode every single person on the planet needs to listen to. If you have even a passing interest in the creative endeavor that is surrounding film in any way at all, for the love of sweet Jesus, please listen to the ItMod Chatcast with Larry Fessenden. Listen to all the ItMod podcast Chatcast, but that's one, the Larry Fessenden one, which I just have to say, it blew the roof off all other indie interview podcasts. It was fantastic. It was, dare I say, it was up there with my very own interview with Peter Weller. And I anyway, while we're talking about indie podcasts, I would like everyone to be aware of our September sponsor. We have a particular sponsor for the entire month of September. You should have already heard their promo. You should have already checked out their podcast. I've played it on the last few interviews that we've posted over on the Booth Talk feed. But if you haven't, check out How I Ripped Off Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a very funny, very cool, very interesting podcast. I'm going to play their promo in just a minute, but they have been sponsoring us for the entire month of September over on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/aftermoviediner. And because of that, I've been banging on about them all month, and quite rightly too, because they put out a great show. Here is their promo, and then we will be getting to our guest this week, which is Brad Gullickson from ItMod, In the Mouth of Darkness. You are going to love this episode on the Poltergeist shows. So sit back, relax, enjoy the How I Ripped Off the Buffy promo, then check out their show and enjoy this episode all about Poltergeist. And love the indie community spirit of podcasting and creativity. Please.
When award-nominated screenwriter Chip Thompson, that's me, hi, was 14, he was mildly obsessed with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, comic books, and a whole manner of geeky pop culture. So he decided to write his own series, centering around what it would be like if he and his best friend and co-host MC,
that would be me,
were supernatural crime-fighting ninjas in Tokyo. It was as terrible as it sounds, full of plagiarism, clumsy references, and outright stealing of ideas, mixed with its own unique blend of B-movie horror and superhero plots and ideas. Now, 17 years later, Chip and MC read through each episode of this series, much to Chip's chagrin, brought to life with their unique acting skills. Whether you're a Buffy fan or enjoy the works of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, My Dad Wrote a Porno, The Evil Dead, or you just like to hear a grown man wince at his teenage ramblings, we think you'll enjoy the How I Ripped Off Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast. Available on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube and Stitcher Radio. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com How I Ripped Off Podcast or on Twitter at How I Ripped Off.
Yeah, I suddenly realized last week that my friend and co-host Jim has gone away to England for 10 days. And I was like, oh, wait, I was planning all these slasher episodes for October. And I was suddenly like, oh, shoot, I don't have anything to kind of close out or even fill up September at all. And not that I mind missing a week, but I had just over the weekend, the wife and I were sat there and, you know, I'm plaguing her this season with all these slasher films. And I said to her, you know, is there any horror movie that, you know, you'd actually want to sit and watch as opposed to some of these slasher films? And she said, sure, the Poltergeist Trilogy. I love the Poltergeist films. Let's watch Poltergeist.
Interesting.
So that's how this came about. And then I'd watched all three, and then I was like, oh, I really want to talk about these. But they're not slashers. So I was like, well, I could fit into September.
Boom.
And then I thought to myself, someone on my friends list has got to be a Poltergeist fan. I can't be of the generation of Poltergeist and not have someone on my friends list that isn't a Poltergeist.
Well, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I don't know if I would call myself a Poltergeist fan. I had seen all the movies before, but they were not movies that I really like adhered to as a kid.
Right.
And I don't think I ever really rewatched them. I've seen them a couple times before, but this is the first time I've watched certainly the second and third one in at least 20 years.
Yeah, and I don't think I'd ever seen the third one. I think I'd only seen 1 and 2, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Again, not a huge fan. Like, it's not like I rewatched them or whatever. But I think this viewing, I think with some added hindsight, kind of had a few things rattle around in my brain.
Yeah,
about them. So I think that's good. That's good.
I was doing a great job of taking notes on the first movie, and then by the second one, I just wrote braces.
Well, the funny thing is for another episode that I'm doing with Eric from the Profondo Cinema podcast, I'm watching all of the Silent Night, Deadly Night sequels. So,
you poor man.
Yeah. 2 through 5 plus the remake. So, yeah. And parts 2 and 3, I was keeping notes on my phone and pretty much I had something to say every kind of 5 or 10 minutes because both those movies are just so nuts. They're just so... who thought this was a good idea?
The first one, and the second film is absolutely bizarre.
Yes, and then the third one almost triples down on just how random it is and how weird it is, and some of the decisions that were made, and the fact that it's Monty Hellman, which is just mad.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one, which is Brian Usner, I was all excited about, and I was like, oh, well, this is clearly like the lost classic of this series, because I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't seen 4 or 5 before. And I thought, Brian Usner, he's normally good for some splatter fun. And it's got like a great random weird cast and stuff. And about 10 minutes into it, I'm like, I've got no notes on this thing. This is fucking tedious. But anyway.
I have not seen those. I've only seen the first two, maybe the third one of Silent Night, Deadly Night. I mean, I love the first movie. I rewatched the first one quite a bit.
The first one's great because it's so grimy. Like it's unapologetically grimy. Like it has there's that one, and weirdly enough, another Christmas slasher, Don't Open Till Christmas, which is set in London and made by the same producers as Pieces. And that's also a very sleazy movie. It's just a grimy, sleazy movie. And I kind of love that about these Christmas movies. And I love, obviously, that Silent Night, Deadly Night, there was massive petitions by mothers groups in the US to have it shut down, and they pulled advertising because none of them wanted to explain to their children the difference between a movie and reality. Not that Santa Claus is a reality either, but But yeah, it's so that I love about it. The sequels, I mean, the sequels, all I can say about them is, very brave and interesting to sort of continue them the way they did, especially considering, guy kills people in a Santa suit, rinse, repeat. Like, it doesn't need a lot of thinking about, yet clearly someone sat down and went, no, we can't just do the same thing again, so let's just make it this bizarre series that doesn't seem to have any tie together. All I can say about the third one is, so Bill Moseley is in 3.
And, sold.
Yeah, except that, again, much like Chop Top, they force him to wear this weird contraption on the top of his head where because he's playing Ricky from part 2. He's playing Ricky. He's in a coma. He obviously wakes up out of the coma to try and kill a psychic chick, as you do. But he's wearing this like glass dome over his head, which is keeping his brain in there. Because although in part 2 he was never shot in the head, they claim in part 3 he was shot in the head. And Benjamin Thorne from Twin Peaks is the doctor. And he has reconstructed Ricky's brain for reasons, ? And in order to maintain the brain, because all his skin and skull have gone away, he's wearing this like ridiculous contraption on his head that's kind of keeping his brain with like jelly and whatever in his thing. And it's like a good effect and everything, but I'm watching the movie, like, they can't possibly have him wear this the whole movie. But
and he does?
They do. He wears it. There's even one point later in the movie where he puts a woolly beanie on over the top of it, but he's still clearly got it on. Like, it's utterly bizarre.
I think you just sold a watch. I think I'm going to have to take a look at this.
I can strongly recommend, if you've watched Silent Night, Deadly Night 2 and you don't hate it, you can actually kind of see some of the like insanity and some of the kind of weirdly genius ideas in part 2. If you can watch it through those eyes, you'll love part 3. If you watch part 3 expecting it to be some kind of lost genius, it isn't. It's very boring and weird. But Moseley is pretty good in it as a comatose Ricky.
I like me some Moseley.
He's pretty good. Yeah, it's kind of weird because I was looking up while I was watching it Moseley's IMDb page. And it's kind of insane because he's in so many of these movies throughout the 80s and 90s, and then does like a bit part on Army of Darkness. And I understand, like, he wanted to work with Raimi and he wanted to be in an Evil Dead movie and he was a fan of those movies, but he was already on a career trajectory, especially in sort of B-movie horror, where he was having leading roles or supporting roles. For him to then kind of do essentially a show up, get covered in makeup, and nobody really know you're in the movie until 30 years later kind of role for Army of Darkness is pretty incredible and weird. And he's sort of done that again throughout his career, where he's kind of shown up and done little bit parts, even though he's known as main parts in other bigger films.
Have you seen 3 from Hell yet?
I haven't. No, The weird thing about me as a horror movie fan is I never got on the Rob Zombie train. I haven't.
Why should you?
I've never watched any of his films. I mean, even like House of a Thousand Corpses and stuff, which my friends watched at university because that was kind of like prime kind of grungy horror when I was at university. I just never... Like, if I've seen them in passing. I couldn't tell you what any of them are.
I was really into The Devil's Rejects when it came out, but I went to see it at the theater like a year ago, 2 years ago with Lisa. And something about watching that with your loved one, like, I was just like,
right.
Nah, I can't do this anymore. This, like, nihilism.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing.
Yeah. It's like I put on Slasher the other morning, called Double Exposure, and I have this book called Slasher Movies or something, and it's a coffee table book that has like the history of slashers, and it has a long list of slasher movies you should watch, and it has proto slashers and gialli and all sorts of different stuff in it. It's a really good book. And in one of the things, it was talking about slashers with a twist, and it was talking about double exposure, like it mentioned double exposure, and it showed the poster, and the poster is like spectacularly sleazy. And it's called Double Exposure, and it's about a guy who takes pictures of models all the time, and then the models end up dying. And I'm like, that sounds great, excellent. And it was on Amazon Prime, and I'm like, great, going to watch that then. And yeah, sitting next to my wife, watching this exceptionally sleazy, but also crushingly boring film. Like it was just a badly. It wasn't just badly made. It was just a boring movie that didn't seem to know what it was about. And it had a really good setup, like the whole idea of this photographer slowly driving himself mad because he keeps dreaming about his models dying, and then like a day later they really do in the way that he dreamt them, and he doesn't know if he's really the killer or not. And it's like it's got this great, like 12 Monkeys duality, like am I insane or am I not kind of thing going on in it. But it's so boring the way that they play that out. So I couldn't get in. But yeah, sitting next to your loved one watching films like that, you're just like, I don't know anymore.
Like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Like, I love slashers and I love sleazy movies. I'm a big sleazy movie fan. And Lisa likes slashers and sleazy movies. But there's something specifically about the aesthetic of Rob Zombie's films, and in particular Devil's Rejects and his Halloweens, where they're just so unrelentingly bleak. And that's the point of them. And like for some reason I can't get into that, but I could watch something like Don't Go Into the Basement or something and just have a total blast with Don't Go Into the Basement, which probably has the same philosophy as Devil's Rejects, but doesn't necessarily feel as punishing.
Right. I watched on vacation when we went up to Rhode Island. I watched because they have it on Amazon, I think, Don't Go in the House, which is like the flamethrower slasher.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's the movie I meant. Yeah.
Where the guy ties women up in a conveniently built metal room in his house. Sets fire to them. And I had a lot of fun with it. Like, it was a great, like, just random, sleazy slasher.
Yeah, I dig that one.
But yeah, Double Exposure, man. I was, like, so excited because they talked it up in this book, and they were like, oh, it's, it was made by this mad producer and this weird actor who kind of takes center stage even though he's way over the hill, and claims that women find him irresistible. And I was like, oh, this just sounds hilarious and sleazy and weird and wonderful. And it was just so boring. Got to the end of it. Kim was like, I don't mind you watching it, but I just can't imagine why you watched it to the very end. And I'm like, I don't know. I have some sick fascination. If I start down the road of a movie, I have to kind of finish it.
I never stop.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of movies I can say that that weren't, like with the slasher thing, it's September, it's October, it's Halloween season. I'm going to watch all the slasher and get my hands on. Amazon Prime is absolutely chock full of them at the moment, which is awesome. And I have this book and I'm kind of working my way through it. Plus I'm doing podcast episodes on it. So I'm in the mode to kind of just consume and consume and consume. There's definitely been movies where 10 minutes into it, we've looked at each other and gone, not this season, but like other movies, watching other movies. 10 minutes into it, just being like, I'm going to turn this off. This is not worth, because it's not a genre that I'm necessarily looking to cover. It's not a movie that I'm doing for the podcast. It's not this is just a film we've chosen to watch and we made a bad choice, But most things I'll sit through. Most things I'll sit through and watch. Obviously Jim and I have been doing the literal after-movie diner the last couple of years and going to cinemas, seeing movies, and then going to a diner afterwards. And I think probably the hardest one, I've had a couple where I've been like, you know, because once you're sat down in a cinema, you know, I don't get up in the middle and walk out like I have to sit through it. And there's been a couple where Anger of the Dead, which was a terrible sort of Bulgarian B-movie zombie film that we went to see at a flea pit in Manhattan. And the other one was Maggie, the Arnold Schwarzenegger zombie film.
I saw that.
Which was so bad.
So boring.
So dull. I'm like, I get it. You've made like him caring for his zombie daughter as if he was caring for a cancer patient or something. Like, I get the metaphor, but you're essentially telling me it's a zombie film, but when I sit down and watch it, essentially it's him caring for a cancer patient, and not even a cancer patient that's like got an interesting story or anything. It's just grey and dull and awful. And yet, after watching that, I still went on and watched that Arnie avenges his family from a plane crash movie, which was equally fucking boring as well.
Boring. I saw that too.
But yeah, I still sat down and watched that, even though the Maggie one just fried my brain and how bad it was.
I'm waiting for Schwarzenegger to bring something of merit back, and I'll keep going to his films. Yeah,
I mean, I think it was a shame that when he stopped being the governor and started making movies again, that The Last Stand, which I loved and had so much good time with, got such poor reviews and made such little money. I think had that been the hit he was hoping for, we might have got some more one-off. Like, he might have gone into the Clint Eastwood phase of his career and done more kind of over-the-hill lawmen, you know, in a wacky town with some supporting characters. As it was, I think, because that kind of bummed him out, he's done, you know, franchise stuff, and he's done these sort of little indies where, you know, maybe he can try some stuff out, but I don't know. It's oh well. That's what I got to say about Schwarzenegger right now.
Yeah, I've got the movies I like, and I don't expect much from the next Terminator movie.
No, I don't think anyone is. I mean, I think even the trailer that I've seen now, because as I say, we go to the movies every week. I've seen probably hundreds of times now at this point because they play it before any movie. Even the trailer, it's like, wait a minute, this is exactly the same film we've seen 5 times, except that you've put Linda Hamilton, Arnie, back in it. And now you've floated a story online that Ed, what's his name's coming back? Furlong. And I'm like, is Ed Furlong in 2019 really a selling point for this movie?
God.
The last movie I saw him in was that Attack on Wall Street, the Uwe Boll movie. With who's that Australian dude in it? That was another.
No, that's a German guy.
You know who I mean, though. You know that movie, Attack on Wall Street. I think I watched it.
I saw it
because Eric Roberts was in it. I think it was when I was on Doug Tilley's show, and I did that and some horse racing movie that Eric Roberts.
I didn't realize you were on Tilley's show.
I was on Eric Roberts, the fucking man. I think back on like episode 10 or 11 or something.
Oh man, I got to go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah, I was on that only once. It's like No Budget Nightmares. For the longest time, I was the only guest that had ever been on No Budget Nightmares. I was on episode 10 of No Budget Nightmares. They've subsequently had plenty of guests on that show, but I was for about 100 episodes, something like the only guest that had been on that show. And then Eric Roberts, the fucking man, obviously. They had a different guest every week. But, I did Attack on Wall Street and some horse racing movie that was called, like, Rainbow Paddock or something.
Good stuff.
So, like, terrible title. But it was all right. I mean, you know, those kind of Eric Roberts B movies, it's like, you know what you're going to get going in. So it's all good. It's all good. But anyway,
Dominic Purcell. Right, Jesus. Right. I had to look it up.
Who was really good in the Statham movie about the spies in 1980.
I don't know.
Killer Elite.
Is that the one with Clive Owen?
Yes.
I did see that, but I do not remember anything about it.
I as a Statham mark, I like it. I'm a big fan of it because
Sure.
It's one of the few where he delivers the action that you want to see in a Statham film, but in fact, it's probably the only movie he's done which marries his slower, softer drama pieces, stuff like Blitz and Hummingbird, which over here was called Redemption, I think. And,
I saw that. Yeah.
And his more kinetic action stuff. Killer Elite is sort of, if Redemption is on one side and Safe is on the other, Killer Elite makes a perfect middle movie because it's based on a true story. It's a period film. There's a lot of drama in it, but about every 15, 20 minutes you get like a Statham action sequence.
Sure.
It also had the best trailer of a Statham movie ever, which was you see him in the scene where he bests Clive Owen. He's tied to a chair. He flips over the chair. He lands on the back of Clive Owen, and then he like bounces out a window or something. They show that sequence in like, they have the voice like once in a lifetime, and then they show some action. And it's like Jason Statham is whatever. They showed him like flip, bounce off Clive Owen, bounce out a window, land on a car, and drive away. And then the next line that came up on the trailer was based on a true story. And I'm like, you can't show that action sequence, which is so clearly not based on any truth whatsoever, and then say based on a true story. It made my night when I saw that. The next Statham trailer, which was gave me as much joy, was for the Meg, only because Statham, who has difficulty with long words anyway, just because he has that mouth full of, he's got that voice where he's like, any extra syllable in a word is causing him problems. The fact that in the trailer it zoomed into him in the pod and he just went, "It's Megalodon." I was just like, that is fucking brilliant. Because any time where you can get Jason Statham to mangle the word Megalodon, I was like, that's brilliant. They should just put that in every dinosaur movie from now on. It should just cut to Jason Statham. "It's Triceratops." Be amazing. Anyway, sorry. Rambling off on different things now. But...
Let's do it.
All right. Hello and welcome to the After Movie Diner, and on this very special episode we are excited to welcome back into the booths here at the diner. It is the wonderful host of the ItMod podcast and now the ItMod Chatcast. When I first met him at a Philly Comic-Con, back when Philly Comic-Con was like a small community of things, Brad and I hung out. I interviewed James Hong. We were fledgling blogger podcasters. But since the diner has gone off and In the Mouth of Darkness has gone off, Brad has reached high echelons and is now on the top of film journalism. I am not one for film critics, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, but when they are good, they are really good, and our guest tonight is really, really good at being a film journalist and a film fan. It is none other than the In the Mouth of Darkness's own Brad Gullickson. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, hello.
Hey, man. Yeah, I was just thinking the other day because, as I say, you've been on the show a couple of times. We did the wonderful William Shatner double bill. We did the Ninja Vemba episode, and we need to have you on a lot more. Your wonderful and incredibly talented wife writes for our website, which is a joy. But I feel like in the last couple of years, it may even be longer, but you have become, sir, just a legend in the making of film journalism. And I'm not blowing smoke. Like, the ItModcast is fantastic, but like now you've got your Chatcast. You go to all these conventions. You are the official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse Winchester. You're shooting for the moon, and it's wonderful to see, and you have the talent to back it up. How's that all going, and how did it all happen, man?
That is all very flattering, John. Thank you so much. I do think back to that Philadelphia Wizard World we went to, and I remember because I was like hanging on your coattails so I could meet James Hong.
Right.
And I remember sitting behind you, or actually, I think we did that interview standing at his booth, right?
We did, yeah. And there was like a couple of other blogger podcasters next to us as well.
Such a strange experience. And I just remember like watching you talk to him, and he was talking to you like you were a human. And I was blown away by that. And I've sort of been chasing that sensation for myself ever since that day, honestly. And I remember we also went to a Quantum Leap panel that year.
We did,
and we sat in the press seats and listened to Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell talk about Quantum Leap. And I was high on that experience. And, you know, from that point, I can't even remember if I had launched In the Mouth of Darkness as a blog yet.
I think you were blogging, otherwise I'm not quite sure how we would have come across each other, maybe. But
so I was doing the blog, but we hadn't done the podcast yet, and I certainly wasn't like pursuing interviews at that time. But that was really like the beginning of me going, well, if John can talk to people like James Hong and Richard Roundtree occasionally, then what's to stop me? And then I just started pursuing that a little harder. And then the podcast took off, and I started writing for Film School Rejects. And yeah.
No, I was going to say, yes, you part of your resume, which I forgot in my introduction, because I didn't write anything down. I just blurted it out. But yes, you write for Film School Rejects, which you sort of came through One Perfect Shot, right? Didn't they merge or something?
Yeah. Well, Film School Rejects purchased One Perfect Shot and then sort of absorbed me. And once that happened, that gave me a lot more access to publicists, really.
Right.
And that was about 2.5 years ago. And just been like running wild since. And it's been a total blast talking to, you know, my heroes.
Yeah, it is. It's a really funny thing. The whole, you know, that first year at Philly when I was doing a bunch of interviews, because I forget, it was the first year I was there that we met, right? It wasn't the second year.
I think so.
It was the same year that like the Evil Dead cast and everything were there, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've ever listened to the show that I did about that Philly Comic-Con, I was, you know, nervous, green, had no idea what I was doing. I had no like professional equipment. I had this like dollar store MP3 recorder. The guy I was getting interviews through, Jerry Milani, was, you know, frustrating. There was no Wi-Fi in the place. You know, everything about it was like complicated.
Yeah, and I remember you being really stressed.
Yeah, because it was adding, you know, you show up, you know, your goal is I've got to talk to these people that I've been in awe of for 30 years, you know, whatever it is. And I'm this guy with no confidence, you know, working out of his back room, you know, who's made himself seem legitimate because he has a, you know, website with a name, but really, you know, there's no legitimacy to me outside of my fandom. And, you know, I had wangled Jerry to get me some interviews, and then I was like, okay, I guess I've got to do this. And it was awkward and nervous and difficult. And added to that was all these other pressures outside of my own insecurities. And so it was this sort of mad experience, but there's something in me, and I don't know what it is, that when I have to cross the room and shake the hand, that's how I always think about it. When I have to like cross a room full of people and just be like, zero in on someone and shake the hand and do it, something kicks in. It's like adrenaline or whatever. I presume it's like what people feel jumping out of planes, even though I would never do that. And so something like the James Hong or something was just, you've just got to do it. You've got this interview with James Hong and you've got to do it.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. So that was it. And I would love to go to more conventions. I think the reason that I don't is that in a way it's become, well, twofold. A, I don't have the money. My day job and living in New York just sort of doesn't facilitate. It facilitates me living in New York and having a great life here, but it does not facilitate me traveling around the country, going to different conventions, sadly. And I think I would have to make that a goal if I was going to really do it. And I'm not sure that is my goal.
Yeah, and that's certainly what we've done this past year in particular. Lisa and I, we made the decision to submit to Sundance, and then once we were accepted into Sundance, we decided we're going to take the year and go to as many film festivals as possible and talk to as many people that will, agree to.
Yeah.
And, it's cost a lot of money, and it's been, it's been draining financially, but it's also been a total delight. But it was something that we had to really commit towards.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I feel like I always think when I go down the avenue of, because every kind of couple of years I sort of have this spurt of, well, maybe I could really make the After Movie Diner a thing, and I kind of push for a bunch of stuff, and then the momentum kind of eases off a little. But I think, you're obviously benefited by the fact that, like, Lisa is coming along for the journey.
Yes.
And that's not to say that Kim isn't supportive. It's just that she's not a film journalist. She's not excited or interested by that process.
Sure.
She's also not necessarily, like, into celebrity in quite the way that I, or not celebrity, but like actors and whatever in the way that I am. And so that helps, I think. But the other consideration of the money consideration. And thirdly is, I don't know, like, if the After Movie Diner tomorrow became a thing, I don't know how I would cope with it or what I would do, because I'm such a one-man operation, so it's kind of difficult. That sounds like a bunch of excuses, but it just is. I've decided a long time ago that with stuff like the James Hong thing, or with stuff like interviewing Ted Raimi or whoever it is, it comes down to enjoy those moments for what they are. Like, enjoy those experiences for what they are. Get the excitement from them, what they are. If it brings 1,000 more viewers to the website, hallelujah. If it doesn't, don't feel the crushing shame with that. I would have thought that my interview with Peter Weller would have skyrocketed me to the top of what everyone was interested in online. And yet, nobody really cared.
That's what I've discovered in this last year, because this last year we launched the ItMod Chatcast, which is like a weekly interview show.
Which I love, by the way. You guys are great.
Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. But it's hilarious to me which interviews find traction and which ones don't.
Yes,
like I had Emilio Estevez on. I was like, this is it. I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to hit the big time. And nobody listened to that interview.
I mean, I listen, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, no, the Peter Weller episode, I've even had niche people on who have a big enough following. So I've had Kids in the Hall members on my show.
Yeah.
I had John Daniel from the Mountain Goats, who, while not a famous musician, has a rabid following. Like, his shows sell out across the country, and he has a podcast himself, and, he has a rabid following. And again, not the Kids in the Hall have a rabid following. Peter Weller, Michael Ironside, some of the people I've interviewed, you would have just assumed, oh, this is the one. This is the one that's going to, the After Movie Diner is going to be the thing that all the film bloggers talk about. And actually, from what I see on social, it's because the After Movie Diner doesn't do stuff like, who's this guy, post a picture of RoboCop, wrong answers only. Because I don't do shit like that, nobody knows who I am. But if I did shit like that, people would care, I guess. I don't know. That sounds bitter of me, but you know what I mean.
Well, I'm glad that I got you to this place.
You got me to a bitter, dark place. And another thing, Brad, I hate about being a man on the margins, making his own website. No, that's not true. With all our contributions on After Movie Diner, the last 3 months, we're seeing the best numbers we've ever seen on the website. Not necessarily in the podcast, but on the website, we're seeing the highest numbers of traffic on the website, and that's mainly due to the volume of content that I'm doing currently. I'm putting something out about every 2 or 3 days, and I've got something in the pipeline just about for the next 2 or 3 days. And for whatever reason, whether it's, my contributors pulling a couple of articles out of thin air, or whether it's me reviewing what seems to be like 5 back-to-back really great indie movies that I had a ton of fun with Either way, it's an accumulative effect. But it's also exhausting because I have like a day job and a wife and a life, So it's it's phenomenal that we're able to do what we do, and I do it just to get that next Peter Weller interview, whatever that next Peter Weller interview is. And you don't ever assume it'll happen, but somewhere in the distance you're going to pull off. Like Jim Belushi will be on my podcast at some point. I know. You know what I mean? Like
you gotta will it.
Gotta will it. But no,
that's my Shatner, man. Like I got to get the Shatner.
You have got to get goal. Shatner. Well, he's doing that B movie where he fights the devil. Can't you get in touch with the publisher?
I'm working on it, John.
You leave Shatner hanging out there. Well, listen, if I can get Bruce Campbell through the most circuitous route ever, which was I tried his manager, his publicist, movies he was in. I tried Stars. I tried the Ash vs. Evil Dead guys. I'd interviewed Ted and Dana and Ray and Scott Spiegel. I was dancing around him and was getting nowhere. And then he was doing a very small regional book tour for his follow-up to If Chins Could Kill, which I'm going to forget the name of. And I wrote instead to his book publicist, and it was his book publicist that went, sure, you can have an interview with him. But
that was a great interview.
Yeah, it was great for me. It was good but he did kind of give me a lot of answers that I sort of heard before, and it was difficult because when you're interviewing him about a biography, and when you're interviewing him especially, and he does 50 conventions a month. It's difficult to kind of go, could we get into Waxwork 2? Like, he doesn't want to talk about Waxwork 2, and he doesn't want to talk about Moontrap or Mind Warp or Maniac Cop. Like, he doesn't care anymore. So, I had questions about, you were in Dusk Till Dawn 2, you were in Eddie Presley with Tarantino. Why? Tarantino's a huge B-movie fan. Why have you never been put in a Tarantino film? Scott Spiegel, helped Tarantino's producer, whose name I'm going to forget now. Lawrence Bender, helped Lawrence Bender meet Tarantino. Like, the stars were aligned for Bruce to have some big comeback in a Tarantino movie, and it's never happened. The closest is Dusk Till Dawn 2. I had that question in the pipeline, but it just wasn't that kind of interview. So that
I've had plenty of those. I know how that goes.
Yeah. So it was just one of those where he trotted out the same answers. But
still super cool.
Super cool. Got Bruce Campbell on the podcast. You can't say fairer than that. And to look back and say that I spoke to Michael Ironside while he drove from Tennessee to Baltimore was kind of insane. But genuinely thrilled to see how well Itmod is doing. Super happy for all you guys. Love following your stuff. We should probably at the top here, in case people stop listening, tell people where they can find you and what they should be listening to and paying attention to in the Gullickson world.
Yeah, well, I'm loving this part of the podcast. This has been my favorite part of any podcast ever. I think we should just stop the conversation after I give you all my socials. Sure. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and places like that at Mouth Dork. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes and Podbean and places like that. Itmod Chatcast channel, or no, that's not right. I don't even know what I'm doing. The Itmod Chatcast podcast is one channel, and then there's the Itmodcast, which is the regular show. And then I got to promote the show that Lisa and I have been doing for the last half a year, the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast, which we've had a ton of fun doing, where we're basically every month we pick a couple, let's say like Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and then for an entire month we dissect that couple's relationship and we use a self-help book as our guide. And that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's a great concept for a podcast. Kim and I have kicked around many different podcast ideas to do as a couple, but we haven't done anything yet. But it's on the burner somewhere. If I ever
it's a blast. I recommend working with your wife. It's pretty wonderful.
It is wonderful. She's been on the diner, I think 2 or 3 times. and it's always been a thrill. I think most recently we covered Wild Rose together because we got a screening in New York to go see Wild Rose, which was another one. Like 2019 has just been my year of indie discoveries for the last few years. Publicists have been sending me screeners, and I've been watching, 10 or 15 minutes and being like, oh, God,
Sure.
how do I review this? But this year, I don't know what's happened, dude. The tide is turning. End of 2018, we had some great movies. Your own wife suggested Anna and the Apocalypse. I got to see it at the New York Horror Con. It was great.
So good.
Which was fantastic. Got to meet the director and stuff, which was awesome. And then since then, almost every indie movie I've seen hit it out of the park. Tone Deaf is this year's
love Tone Deaf.
Is this year's Mandy if they publicize it right. Freaks is awesome. We've got Freaks coming up this Friday. Interview with the directors going up on the website this week. We've had Gwen, which I really enjoyed, which is a British movie. Madison the Method, Jay Muse's debut, was a lot of fun. Really great movie. 2019, man, I'm feeling it. I'm loving it.
Good.
Which
it's
is
a good place to be.
It is. It's a great place to be because I feel like I've been the grumpy old man of podcasting for the last few years. And people have been like, he just hates everything. And I'm like, I don't. It's just they keep making shitty movies. But now I get to wax rhapsodic about film, which makes me very happy. And because 2019 is doing so well, we're going back to 1982 and covering the Poltergeist trilogy because why not? So, Brad, why don't you give us your first experience with Poltergeist? We're both kind of at the same age, so I imagine it probably hit you as it did with me, kind of on a TV thing. But let me know. When did you?
It was definitely television, and it's one of those movies that clearly had a cultural impact for our generation. But for whatever reason, it was not one that I revisited often. So I saw it on a TV probably. The first time I saw it was probably like on television with commercials. The worst way to watch a film.
Yeah,
especially those. The late 80s, early 90s television commercials.
And probably edited, right? I mean, I don't know, unless you had cable, but probably edited.
No, it was probably edited. And, so I watched it, and I watched it in the context of this is, a quote-unquote horror classic. Because, again, like as a kid, I didn't gravitate towards horror, so I probably didn't watch this movie until my middle school, early high school years. And, I liked it, but I remember thinking like, oh, it's not as good as everyone said it was. Like I had just discovered probably Alien at that point, and I was in love with Alien and Kubrick's The Shining and things like that. And for whatever reason, Poltergeist did not connect with me when I was younger. And then I rewatched it, several years after that. And this is probably the first time I've seen the film in 20 years or so. Certainly that's the case with the sequels. And I appreciated the movie way more today as a grumpy 40-year-old than I did whenever I saw it at, 12 or 11.
Yeah, hands down, I have to agree with that. And it's also a weird one because while I feel like Poltergeist, like you said, was sort of very culturally relevant for our generation, I remember this, people talking about this in the classroom. I remember people talking about the miniseries of It in the classroom, which is kind of ironic with It 2 just having been released. But I seemingly remember, like, they're here and the image of Pennywise, Tim Curry as Pennywise, being something that kind of floated throughout my childhood as one of those things where, oh, yeah, there are these things called horror movies kind of out there in the world. Gremlins would be another one, which is interesting because it's another Spielberg-produced film. But as we've got to the point now, as we have done with the internet culture or Zennials or whatever you want to call us, that kind of middle lost generation between Gen X and Millennials, for whatever reason, while people like John Carpenter have had their due and Wes Craven have got their due, and even Tobe Hooper's stuff, like obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but also things like Funhouse and
Life Force.
Life Force is the other movie I was have kind of done the geeky, nerdy round. For whatever reason, and I think maybe it's Spielberg's quote-unquote involvement, I feel like Poltergeist, for all of its relevance, has sort of become the lost horror trilogy. Like, people don't talk about it in the way that they talk about even the Alien trilogy, even though everyone kind of has an issue with Alien 3, and they don't talk about it the way they talk about Indiana Jones or Gremlins or Evil Dead or, you know, The Thing or any of those other movies that kind of had a sort of a big cultural impact from the 80s. Yet, you know, the Poltergeist trilogy is not only, as we'll discuss, a solid horror film trilogy, but the first one in general, while I'm not about to necessarily exalt it, I am going to say, from an influential standpoint, it is like a very, very strong movie, and a really kind of like, I think, again with hindsight, sort of a rip-roaring horror film that I would like, although it has its fans, I think is ripe for rediscovery.
Sure, I would agree with that, and I was surprised at how relevant I found the film to 2019 issues as well. Like,
yes.
Not to say that like Poltergeist is a political movie, but I don't know. There are moments in it where I feel like it's having that it has a lot on its mind, and you know, you can't help but take notice from the opening credits when, you know, the national anthem is playing as the TV stations are going dark for the night, and we have, you know, the husband, the father, passed out in front of the boob tube as the national anthem plays in the background, and we see the American flag and Iwo Jima, and it's fascinating to see like the horror then come from the TV after that point. And I don't know, and then of course there's the whole concept of the bodies that we have built our nation atop of,
right?
It's got a lot going on beneath all the really well orchestrated jump scares.
100%. And I think that there's a lot of interesting things that we can get into right off the bat. For anyone who hasn't seen it, and I would be very surprised, but if anyone who hasn't seen it, it's about a suburban family literally living in a, you know, picture perfect Tim Burton-esque 1950s throwback you know, suburban community, rows and rows of houses, all the same. The father, played by Craig T. Nelson, is a salesman for the property company that has been building all these houses. We find out in the movie that they've been building these houses atop of graveyards, and instead of moving the bodies, have simply moved the gravestones, relocated the gravestones, but left the bodies, which has caused a poltergeist outbreak in Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams' home, which you know, throws their furniture about, traps their daughter in a kind of nether dimension, a kind of between dimension, and causes them to bring in paranormal investigators and various other things. And it plays out with a lot of sort of interesting horror beats and gruesome effects and some really sort of fun visuals, as you would expect from both Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg. But the thing that Brad was alluding to is that there is some very, certainly in the early half of the movie, there's sort of a two Americas fighting each other.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, Craig T. Nelson as the father is reading a book on Reagan. You know, as we say, we've had all this American military industrial complex imagery 2 or 3 times on the TV, because whenever the TV shuts down, it's playing the national anthem and showing all these kind of clips from Washington, D.C. and monuments and things around the country. So there seems to be this, like, well, obviously if they're living the white suburban life, they would be probably conservative. But then there's scenes of them, you know, smoking pot and, you know, reliving the time that they were both kind of wild hippies and There's
Well,
talk...
it's baby boomer horror,
Right.
right?
Right. But there's this interesting, like nowadays we're led to believe that there's this like very definite split, and conservatives sit somewhere in a cold room clutching their pearls, moaning about everything, while liberals run amok, fornicating, taking acid and, kicking puppies or whatever liberals are meant to be doing. We have this very defined thing. Whereas, as you say, with baby boomer, this is quintessential baby boomer horror. You have the clash between the hippie anarchic Tobe Hooper and the somewhat more family-friendly conservative Steven Spielberg. And in my review of the movie that I wrote on Letterboxd, my feeling was, Spielberg worked with Dante, and then he worked with Tobe Hooper, and then he worked with Joe Dante. I was like, why didn't Spielberg produce at least one movie for each of the masters of horror? Because there was something that happened when you put the anarchic 1960s, long-haired, beardy-weirdy B-movie guy, the Tobe Hooper, the Joe Dante, with the slightly more upper-middle-class, buttoned-down, family-friendly, adventure filmmaking Steven Spielberg. When you put those two together... And we only have this and Gremlins really as an example. But movie magic, right, Brett?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is fascinating. I do feel like I can feel the hand of Spielberg a little bit more on Poltergeist than I do Gremlins. Where I mean, clearly there's a lot of Spielberg going on in Gremlins. But I feel like Joe Dante has lots of opportunity to shine as an individual authorial voice. Whereas I do feel like at times the Tobe Hooper of Life Force and the Funhouse and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is being steered heavier by Spielberg.
Maybe. I think Joe Dante has the advantage of being the parody Spielberg. Like, I've always looked at Dante as sort of, especially with his bigger movies, he's the parody Spielberg. He knows how to make a family-friendly adventure romp. He just comes from that, B-movie Corman school where he's like, we could also whip in some subversive madness. And that's not to say that Steven Spielberg can't be subversive, because he can be. But, and I'm being very simplistic and broad strokes with my examples. But I think, therefore, the Joe Dante-Spielberg pairing is slightly harder, or rather slightly easier to kind of see what Dante could do with it, because Dante is sort of painting with a similar palette almost, without wanting to sound too pretentious. Whereas Tobe Hooper comes from, if you look at his first few movies, even before he gets the glossier canon stuff that he does, when you look at his he comes from that very rough around the edges, 16 millimeter world. And therefore, the clash is going to be slightly more noticeable, I guess, is all I mean.
And I think the problem with Poltergeist as a conversation is that you can't talk about it without talking about the controversy of who directed the movie, right? And when I'm watching it in 2019, I am really trying to decipher the hand of Spielberg in this film. And is the rumor or the narrative that has been shaped by the Hollywood Reporter of Poltergeist steering my opinion of the film? I really wish I could take all those stories and push them out of my head and just watch Poltergeist as its own thing, but it's impossible.
Well, you see, I actually, again, because I kind of came to the movie again, having not really seen it much like yourself for about 20 years, I for whatever, and I think maybe because of my cynicism towards a lot of media, I was sort of able to go, and also being a big Tobe Hooper fan, I sort of was able to go, no, this is like watching it again. And I had that momentarily in the back of my mind with everyone being like, well, Spielberg really directed Poltergeist. That to me has always sounded a bit like what we call in England the pub gobshite version of events. It's sort of jokey because we have the Hammer reviewer on our show, on our website, Jim Wallace, who writes as the bloke down the pub. And the reason why that is there's this kind of character from British culture of like the pub gobshite who's always sat at the bar in a pub going, well, I know more about this subject than you do, and here's my take on it, kind of thing. And the Spielberg Tobe Hooper thing kind of always smacked to me a bit of that. There's no evidence from photographs on set that like Spielberg is, sat there directing actors or directing shots. And, both directors have said, obviously Spielberg was a hands-on producer. You can't watch Poltergeist and believe he wasn't involved. His involvement is very obvious to the movie. But I would argue so is Tobe Hooper's involvement is very obvious to the film. I would say that there are certainly both camera movements, special effects movements, and dark movements in the movie that I don't see Spielberg making, even at his darkest, even at his tearing the heart out of someone in a family-friendly, if racially insensitive action Indiana Jones film. Even at his darkest, I don't see Spielberg doing some of the beats that are in Poltergeist. And I think it's what you're seeing in Poltergeist is less someone like Spielberg taking the reins and being like, Hooper, now listen, I'm going to direct this film, which I don't believe he did. I think what you see is the push and pull between Hooper being like, well, this is how I would do it, and Spielberg saying, that's fine, but if we want this to be a Hollywood movie with Hollywood money that makes Hollywood money, we should probably consider maybe doing it this way. Like, that's how I see the conversation going. And I see it as a collaboration more than I see it as a Spielberg barging Hooper out the way and demanding it be directed a certain way.
Well, I think if you listen to any of the cast interviews regarding this film, they all say that Hooper was the guy that called action, right? So, he was the one who called action. He was the one who called cut. And most of them call Hooper their director. He was there for the pre-production. He was there for the walkthroughs. He was there for the blocking. That was Hooper. And the only issue is like you're saying is, Spielberg was there, nearly like 6 days out of the 7 days that they were shooting. And he was there to lend his very strong opinion on what they needed to make a profitable, big budget Hollywood fare. And so, it probably is a collaboration. And I probably shouldn't read the Wikipedia page right before I watched the movie, but I did. And it infected my brain.
Yeah, no, I kind of saw it. I kind of did see it as a collaboration. I wasn't, thankfully, hampered by the stories about how it was directed. And I sort of see Spielberg as someone who came in with these guys who are a little bit more out on the edges and just, he smooths off he's the plane to the rough bit of oak, if that makes any sense. Like he's planing off the twigs that are sticking out and rounding off the edges a little bit so that it's a bit more palatable. I think had Hooper made this on a obviously much smaller budget, but more his way, then it would have been a much grittier and probably almost harder watch than it is.
Sure.
But I think that what I really appreciated about Poltergeist, and what surprised me because I felt like I hadn't remembered the movie, was rewatching it, just how far it does go. I mean, the guy ripping his face off in the uncut version, the not the TV edit, but guy ripping his face off in the unedited version is genuinely still, even with the effect, upsetting and unnerving, even to us who have sat and watched, as we were talking about earlier, the sleazy, grimy slasher films. It's genuinely unnerving. The steak, tearing itself open and all the guts coming out of
gross.
It's so gross. And, I honestly, things like that, and also some of the shots, like when Zelda Rubinstein, Tangina, is doing her bit to camera, and then like the souls come down the stairs. The way that is shot is a very inventive Hooper style way to shoot things. That didn't like smart to me of a Spielberg. There are plenty of sequences in this movie that smart to me more of a Hooper involvement than I do a Spielberg in terms of the inventiveness. And what I took away from it, actually, weirdly enough, because I'm such a proselytizer for people like Raimi and Carpenter, was just how influential Poltergeist is in the way that it is shot. Some of the camera angles, some of the special effects, some of the movements and things are very influential on films such as Evil Dead 2 and The Burbs and movies like that. There is beats in this movie that I can see playing out throughout kind of 80s horror that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think it does take, ideas of the past. I mean, in a lot of ways, it feels like a Richard Matheson novel that never existed but has been adapted, or a Stephen King suburban horror story, and it really does update it to, as we were saying, the baby boomer culture, Reagan era worries, and delivers something that is felt in every ghost story going forward in cinematic culture.
Yeah, and I think that, you look at a sequence, and I understand like the special effects now could look a bit ropey, but, the bit where it's also, we haven't talked about the humor in the film. The film is hilarious, but there's that wonderful moment where one of the paranormal investigators says to Craig T. Nelson how he spent 7 hours filming something moving very slowly across the floor by itself. And Craig T. Nelson goes, huh, really? Opens the door to the bedroom to find everything like whipping around at an insanely frantic pace.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of beautiful sequence that I feel like Raimi has borrowed. And I hate to say that because I'm a big Raimi fan, but the floating record player where the compass lands on the record and starts to play the record in midair. I mean, that's just such a wonderfully inventive and evocative idea. And, people nowadays watching it will probably laugh at the effect, but the idea is very strong and feels to me like something... not only does Raimi like, especially in the Evil Dead movies, to like whip stuff around in the air and things like that, but obviously you can't not think about like the record player sequence in the basement in Evil Dead. There's a lot of that to it that slots to my mind, even though Poltergeist I think is thought of as this like glossy Hollywood horror amidst the very kind of grungy, grimy indie horror that was coming out in the early 80s. That it is as inventive and as creative as any of those indie movies that we hold dear now, and we should hold dear. But I feel like Poltergeist deserves a seat at the table that it's not quite getting right now, if nothing else, for its ideas, because I think there's some really good ideas in it.
I mean, I think so much of the reason why the film works, though, is the cast that's involved, is the family. It feels like a family. It feels like a family in crisis. And you believe when Carol Ann, goes off into the other side, you believe the terror that is being experienced by the mother.
Yeah, definitely by Jo Beth Williams, who's amazing in the movie. But the one thing I would say that did make me laugh is how, and this again might be either a commentary on 80s housewives or just the nature of 80s movies in general, but the fact that within 6 hours Craig T. Nelson has scraggly hair and stubble and is going insane, and Jo Beth Williams, even on the third day of the Poltergeist haunting, looks like she just stepped out of the salon.
She looks great even coming out of the other side and covered in ectoplasm.
Right. But it's, and I don't know, again, like I say, whether that's because it's an 80s movie and therefore the demands are that the woman looks pretty, or whether that's some sort of subversive commentary on, the housewife culture of sort of the 50s and the 80s.
I wouldn't give it that much credit.
No, but
I'll give it some credit, but not that much credit.
You know where I'm coming from, though, Brad. Like the idea that, because it's weird, the parallels between the 50s and the 80s. Back to the Future, they go back to 1955. Like they're two very conservative decades. They're two very affluent decades. And they're two very artistic decades as well. They're also two decades that have a very specific iconography and ideology sort of boiled into them. So there's this interesting comparison between the two that I don't think the same can be said for like the 1980s and the 2010s, which I would guess would be the next 30-year cycle or whatever. But that 50s, 80s comparison we see throughout 80s and early 90s movies, and it's rife in Poltergeist, from, like we say, the perfect hair of Jo Beth Williams throughout the movie to the rows and rows and rows of identicate little boxes on the hillside, as that song goes. And I
love the confrontation, the first confrontation that Craig T. Nelson has with Louis Teague, his boss.
Yes.
And, when he takes him out over by the graveyard that's still existing, and, they're talking about the plans to relocate that graveyard so they can build another home. And then Craig T. Nelson comes to the realization where he's been living atop a graveyard.
Yeah.
But like the cynicism of Louis Teague in that scene, and how it just like completely cracks the brain of Craig T. Nelson. Like when you start to realize why the poltergeists are here, like that is such, I guess like maybe in retrospect, it's like obvious, but it has a real power to it. And there's a real anger in Craig T. Nelson. And then the audience member gets a real anger. And, you start thinking about your own home and what Civil War battlefield it's built atop.
Right. Well, also, I mean, what I liked about that is that instead of it being, we both watch a lot of movies where, whether it's, and I've talked about this before, but whether it's like the Statham effect, where as in order to explain something away, they go, well, he was in the FBI next, or, whatever, he was a special forces guy or whatever. Or in horror movies where they go, it was built on a Native American burial ground next. Like, it's just an explanation and it really has no more weight other than, well, the book was cursed by some demon next, like it move on. This movie, like you say, the idea of this capitalist talking about like, well, they can go grieve at a gravestone just down the road, and, we'll build houses right here because look at this view and you can have a house. And, it's almost that biblical thing of, and this will be the only time I bring up anything religious, but like that biblical thing of, offering, when Jesus is in the wilderness, being offered and tempted by the devil, all the world's at his fingertips. It's that sequence. It's, Teague is up there with Nelson kind of going, you will have this palatial home that will overlook these other much more meager homes. Nelson is so horrified by the concept. And it's, again, because it's this really, we think about things in a very black and white way nowadays in 2019, but it's this really nice clash. And it's that particular sequence is not a clash between the liberal or the Republican. It's the clash between the family values conservative, which values the graveyard and the process of burying your family and knowing that your family is there and being able to honor them and and having a home for your living family that is, pure and clean and in the best neighborhood and all the rest of it. It's that coming in conflict with what we now think of this very kind of capitalist conservative who is just greed, consume, will worry about the world, when we're dead, kind of thing, or with whether it's environmental issues or whether it's whatever. So it's this really interesting thing because there is the conservatism of our father's generation, which is far more open-minded and family-orientated and about building a life and building a home and having a decent job and raising a good family and all the rest of it. That is at odds. Some of the things that they point out nowadays on satirical shows is you're at odds with the message that you can't promote families and at the same time promote a corporation that's destroying the world. That's ridiculous. And it's interesting that this movie from 1982, just as Reagan era is kicking in, is making those comparisons. And maybe I went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but I feel like it's definitely worth mentioning, right?
Yeah, I think for sure. And then, on the other side of things, if you just want to look at it as a straight scare picture, I was talking to a coworker on Twitter today, and he brought up the point of how Poltergeist works on kid fears, the tree outside,
right,
the clown, and it works on adult fears of the parent and the loss of a child.
Yes.
And how Poltergeist, what's scariest to you in Poltergeist evolves over the course of your own life. And I think that's really interesting because not a lot of films can do that.
No, that is true. That is interesting. Yes. And it's a really good, and it's almost funny, isn't it? It's almost like when someone makes a point like that, you think to yourself, that is right. And why is it that there aren't more horror movies that play to both ends of the spectrum? Because most horror movies, for whatever reason, because of Hollywood cynicism about who watches them most likely, are aimed at teenagers, for most of them.
Family horror is rare.
Yes.
Like the dynamic that you're seeing in Poltergeist, you don't see that too often. Or if you do, a bunch of them get knocked off early on, and one person rises to the top, and it becomes like the teenager story or
right.
The father's revenge story or what have you. Here, we get the whole dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. This sits atop, The Exorcist and the Omen trilogy to some extent. Because they're really the only other examples that where family horror is at the focus, unless you go to something like dearly departed Larry Cohen's It's Alive or something, but that's slightly different. But you could watch again, and it comes back to what I was saying about feeling like Poltergeist is sort of lost in the shuffle, because I feel like people will talk about The Exorcist and people will talk about The Omen, maybe not quite so much, but they'll talk about The Omen. But Poltergeist doesn't seem to be on that list yet. Certainly the first movie stacks up for me. Like if you were going to do a trilogy of family horror, you couldn't do much better than The Exorcist, The Omen, and Poltergeist. Each one, the first movie of each franchise, because they all examine, the adult fear of losing a child or being afraid of a child or misunderstanding a child or wondering, is your child going to be, all right or healthy or mentally healthy?
But what Poltergeist and The Exorcist do, what The Omen really doesn't, or maybe at least not in the first film, is that it does put you into the point of view of the child characters,
yes,
as well as the point of view of the parental figures. And at different points in Poltergeist, you're on a different family member's side, and I think that is a lot of fun.
No,
and again,
it is.
because of the performers, they all sell it.
Yeah, and it's definitely a movie that, in a way that you wouldn't, not in a orchestrated or obvious way, but in a fun way, darts from genre to genre and also from character to character, in the sense that, and with this great sense of humor, like I've spoken before, whether it's the guy, the construction worker, like who's digging the pool, reaching in and eating the food off the kitchen counter, or whether it's Craig T. Nelson's bedraggled father's reaction to the paranormal investigators or anything like that. It's a movie that, you know, it starts off as one thing, it becomes another thing. By the time the paranormal investigators show up and Zelda Rubinstein is wandering around with her, patented monologue that she has to have about, going to the light and the lost souls and all the rest of it, which she does in every movie of the trilogy. She rolls out the same monologue every film. But by the time you get to that, it's sort of become like this other movie, and it's sort of elevated. It's not elevated, but it's just changed again to become this other film. And it's interesting because the clash of what the family has already gone through and what the paranormal investigators think they've seen, and then when those two worlds collide, it then becomes a third thing. Like it's, we have a story whereby the guy, as we talked about earlier, who dreams about ripping his face off and eating a chicken full of maggots and seeing a steak essentially puke up its own guts. I don't know.
Yeah.
What that steak does. That guy is like, yeah, he won't be coming back. So like you even have a situation where, one of the investigators is sort of has his own narrative, and has his own gross out adventure. So it's it's fascinating as it keeps layering on all this different stuff.
Yeah, and like the structure of it, as you're saying, how it's, it is the family story, but then the paranormal investigators come in, and then Zelda Rubinstein comes in, and she cleans the home, supposedly. And you think, like, okay, it's over. Why are we spending so much more time with him? And then you realize, oh, no, it's not over.
Yeah.
And so there's, like, that extra ending on the film. Like, structurally, it's a unique little movie, and it's something that James Wan would go on to do in the Insidious films and try to replicate there.
Yeah.
But he can't do it because he doesn't have the cast and he doesn't have the budget or the vision of Poltergeist.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that was the other thing is that, I'm not a big one on haunting films because a lot of the ones made in the last 20 years, and there might be a generalization, but a lot of them are what I call door slammers. So every 5 minutes a chair falls over or a door slams or something creaks or whatever. And you're like, all right, I get it. Or there's someone, I don't know, breathes a message on a mirror or something. Like there's all these beats that you expect to see in a horror movie, in a haunting film. And most of them don't go to the, inventive side of things, you know what I mean? They're going to bring a painting to life or a doll to life or something's going to fall off a wall or, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Whereas there aren't many horror movies these days. And again, I don't watch a lot of ghost films, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a rich seam of them out there that I don't know about. But they don't seem to do what Poltergeist does, which is so flamboyant. Like Poltergeist in its haunting stuff is so flamboyant. And you know me, Brad, like that's what I love. Like
Yes.
I love that over-the-topness. My favorite horror franchise is Evil Dead, and you can't get something much more loud, bombastic, over-the-top, but also inventive and creative than the Evil Dead trilogy.
Right.
And what I like about Poltergeist versus something like The Conjuring, for example, is you start with chairs whizzing across the floor. That's where it begins. Then it escalates to this whole other thing. At one point, an entire bedroom gets sucked into a closet. And not just like in theory, you physically see it.
Yeah.
And I love how, what I loved about that sequence and what I loved about Poltergeist, talking about the special effects, is on one hand, you have that sequence where he opens the bedroom door and there's things flying in the air that are obviously back projection or superimposed. And you have the compass making the eerie music on the record player and so on. And you have sequences like the tree, where the tree comes alive, which is sort of like a K&B effect style effect where the tree is swallowing the kid. It looks like something out of Nightmare on Elm Street. So you have that kind of thing. But then you have what is both a very scrappy effect, but also a very realistic effect, where literally they are blowing tons of air at an actual bedroom full of stuff. Like, they're literally just throwing stuff into a wind tunnel, and you're seeing it, like, blow off into the closet. And it's such a scrappy effect, but it's also so realistic that it almost is jarring to modern eyes, because we're used to effects being so smooth, I guess. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And, it's not like Poltergeist doesn't have the jump scares or that they're even, they're orchestrated in the same way that a lot of the jump scares in The Conjuring are. But to your point, let's take the clown sequence, for example, towards the end of the movie. The kid has the clown in the chair across from him. He's looking at it. He thinks it's going to be there. He turns his back on it. The clown's gone. He looks under the bed sheet. There's nothing there. We relax, and then it jumps out from behind him. Like, that's a classic jump scare.
Right.
But the clown itself is insane. The effect of the clown is preposterous and out to lunch and gorgeous and weird, and that's why you put the Poltergeist scares over something like The Conjuring. I know lots of people love The Conjuring. I think The Conjuring's fine.
Oh, me too. No, I like it, but I call it like a door slammer.
The over the topness, the design work, the like of Poltergeist with the clown and the tree and the mirror face, like that is Mondo Bizarro wonderful.
Yeah, no, totally, and I absolutely got a massive kick out of that, and I think that the blockbuster mindset of Spielberg means that you don't have to wait very long for the next mad thing to happen, which is glorious. And I think Tobe Hooper is the one making the mad stuff happen. That's kind of how I see the division of labor. Like, Spielberg's like, we should probably have another ridiculous horror beat here. What do you think should happen? And Tobe Hooper goes, he pulls his face off. Great, excellent, do that. I feel like that's probably the dynamic. And again, I may be giving both of them not enough credit, or both of them too much credit. I don't know.
It's one of those things where I just don't think we're ever going to really know. And so if we're not going to know, then who cares?
Yeah. I'm totally at a point where, like, they could both have sat on each other's laps in a single director's seat. It doesn't matter. It's a good movie, and I think it's ripe for not necessarily rediscovery, but certainly more discussion, because I just feel that while you can spit and hit a Facebook group that's banging on about The Thing. And listen, I've banged on about The Thing, so I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying. Okay. Or people who will talk ad nauseum about, I don't know, Wes Craven's New Nightmare or something. You're not necessarily going to find many people talking about the Poltergeist about Poltergeist, which sort of surprises me, just because, with hindsight, watching it now, it does stand up with those other movies. This stands up very nicely with the first Nightmare on Elm Street, stands up very nicely with Exorcist.
It is weird because the elements around Poltergeist for a long time felt, pervasive. They're here. Like, you heard that parodied all over the place.
Yeah.
And that eventually stopped. And if I went and I talked to my nieces and nephews about Poltergeist, they'd have no idea what I was talking about. And if they did, I was going to say they might remember the Sam Rockwell remake, but that's probably not true.
Right. I don't know that anyone remembers that.
Yeah. I kind of liked it. But the problem with the Poltergeist remake was for my money, it had the family dynamic. I loved Rockwell and the clan that was around him, but it was missing that Mondo Bizarro aspect of the original.
Right. It also, I've always said this about remakes in general, but once an original franchise gets to like 3 or more movies, making a remake is sort of redundant. Make a 4th one. Like, it doesn't, like, it's not like you're going to, you're not going to be doing all the same beats as the first movie anyway. You're not like doing a shot-for-shot remake. So your new film, quote unquote, might as well just be a 4th part. Otherwise, what's the point? But you bringing up the clown, it is a perfect moment for us to, I think, bridge the gap between part 1 and part 2, and talk about the Poltergeist curse. Because what makes me laugh about this is everyone talks about the Poltergeist curse,
Sure.
and yet they go on to make 2 more movies. So how frightened of this curse were they actually?
No, I think there's just a lot of sadness around a few of the cast members, and there are, the death of Dominique Dunne is tragic and horrible, and
Yes.
Of course, Heather O'Rourke passing away at such a young age after the third one. Those are all tragedies. Is it a curse? No.
What I do love is the Richard Lawson, who plays one of the paranormal investigators. He was in a plane that went down, killing 23 of the 51 passengers. And because he signed an autograph for someone, they swapped seats and he got a first-class seat. And had he been in the seat he was originally meant to be sitting in, he would have died. Now, that's a much better story if everyone but, let's say, 3 people on the plane die. But the fact that only like half the plane dies, you're really talking about it being a 50-50 thing. You can't suddenly go, well, had I sat in that seat, I would have died. You're like, well, you had a 50% chance of dying because 50% of the people who are on the plane died. I mean, it's not to be. Listen, those 23 people, I feel very bad. But you know what I mean. It doesn't make it a curse, is what I mean.
Sure. What it makes is, perfect fodder for True Hollywood Story.
Right.
Which I definitely watched when that aired.
Obviously, you have the Lou Perriman, who was in Poltergeist, who was one of the football jocks at the beginning, which we didn't talk about, but at the beginning of the movie, literally a bearded guy with a busted beer can that is spraying beer everywhere wanders into a family's home, coating it from head to toe with beer, and nobody bats an eyelid. Like, literally the ceiling and carpet and walls of that home are covered in beer, and nobody cares. It's played for laughs. You know what I mean? I love that. But apparently, Lou Perriman, let's read this. He played Pugsley, a construction worker in the first film, was known for his roles in other horror films too. In 2009, Seth Christum Tatum. So 2009, like decades after the movie was made. But they're still claiming this
curse.
Part of the full-on curse. Seth Christopher Tatum, who was on the run from police, entered Lou Perriman's home and attacked him with an axe. Which is sort of dramatic and crazy. Tatum, who later turned himself in, said he had attacked the man because he needed his car and some other items from the home. So not because he'd watched Poltergeist then. But the reason why I said about the clown is that another thing that apparently led credence to the curse was the animatronic clown on set almost killed Oliver Robbins, the small boy in the film. And apparently he was saved only at the last minute by Spielberg himself, who ran from his producer's chair, probably over by craft service, and apparently saved Oliver Robbins while the mechanical clown was almost choking him. Robbins, undeterred, returns for the sequel.
I guess it's a good thing Spielberg was on set every day.
Yeah, right. Spielberg, saver of children. There's a lot has been made of the fact that in the final sequence with Jo Beth Williams in the rain-filled swimming pool, that those are apparently real skeletons in the water.
That's what?
You hadn't heard about that?
No.
Oh, yes. Let me look that up. Again, it might be in Poltergeist movie. Let me think. Were real skeletons used in the making of Poltergeist? This is a Snopes article, and it says, yes, they were. So Snopes is claiming it is. Spooky legends have long haunted the 1982 horror classic Poltergeist, including a creepy backstory that periodically reappears about human skeletons being used as props in one of the original film sequences. In the movie, Diane Freeling, Jo Beth Williams, is dragged into a family swimming pool, blah, 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 you have to understand that the sequence took probably 4 to 5 days to shoot, so I was in mud and gloop all day of my life for like 4 or 5 days with skeletons all around me as I was screaming. In my innocence and naivety, I assumed that these were not real skeletons. I assumed they were prop skeletons made out of plastic or rubber. I found out, as did the whole crew, that they were using real skeletons because it's far too expensive to make fake skeletons out of rubber. And I think everyone got real creeped out about that. Is it that expensive to make skeletons out of rubber? Isn't it more expensive to procure real skeletons?
I mean, maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. I had never really thought about it.
A spokesperson for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the film's original production company, could not confirm the claim. We also contacted current distributor Warner Brothers Pictures and co-producer Steven Spielberg's own company, Amblin Entertainment, seeking comment. The movie director, Tobe Hooper, died in 2017, but other reports concerning the Poltergeist curse, blah, 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 blah. Casson, who is Bruce Casson, who was the film's assistant prop master, said they came from Carolina Biological, Casson said, naming a medical and science supply company that sold human skeletons mainly for use in medical schools back in the 1980s. Replica skeletons did not exist, as far as I remember, at that time, Casson. I'm sorry, replica skeletons existed in 1982. I'm pretty sure replica skeletons existed in 1932 when they were making Gothic horrors back then. So I don't honestly, this idea of like, what, replica skeletons? What modern marvel is this? No, I'm pretty sure we've been molding fake bones since probably since movies began, and in probably before that, even for theatre and stuff. So I don't know why Casson is saying that, but he said they're now common and relatively cheap, and the rush to the bottom line for cost will dictate. Wow. Yeah, well, it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but people can look it up. Apparently, it has been confirmed by people who were involved in the movie that real skeletons were used in that last sequence.
That is messed up. Wow, Joe Beth Williams, rock and roll.
Yeah. One last thing. Hang on a second. The guy who made the reboot, Gil Keenan, probably in order to try and flog his reboot, claimed that there was a lot of like problems on set, strange equipment failures, and
whatever.
And he said that he was haunted by a female figure in a black dress.
Oh, go F yourself.
Yeah, right, exactly. In order to sell my back. See, I kept seeing this Poltergeist movie pop up with this, because they have the scary clown as their poster, because of course they do.
Sure.
Because it was 2015 and they had no idea how to sell a remake to a movie that didn't need to be remade. But I kept seeing this pop up and I was like, weird that someone else would make because it looked like such a kind of Charles Band full moon.
The poster is atrocious to the remake.
It looked like such a straight-to-video effort that I was like, oh, it must have just been someone trying to cash in on the name. But no, it was a full-blown reboot. I didn't even remember that one coming out.
And the reason I went and saw it originally is because the director, Gil Keenan, he did that CG animated kids film, Monster House, and I was a big fan of that film.
Okay.
Which was a haunting of its own right. And I thought the guy who could make Monster House could make a really interesting take on Poltergeist. And like I said, the family aspect I enjoyed. And Sam Rockwell's great in the movie because Sam Rockwell's great in everything. But the scares and the effects are just no bueno.
Yeah. So just to follow up on the Spielberg thing, something that lends credence to the Spielberg directed this is because he had something in his contract that said while prepping E.T. he wasn't allowed to direct another movie. And he has made comments about the fact that Tobe Hooper wasn't kind of a take charge kind of guy. So very often if like a practical question needed to be answered, probably by a grip or something, Spielberg would jump in. That doesn't necessarily mean that Hooper didn't direct the actors or the camera movements or whatever. But
I would not want to direct my movie with Steven Spielberg on set every day. Yeah. And I know 1982 Spielberg is a little different than 2019 Spielberg, but not much. He's still the dude who'd made Close Encounters by this point in Jaws, and he was becoming an empire unto himself with Amblin. And I could see that not being a fun working condition, or if they got along swimmingly, then, it could be a blast. But I don't know if I'd want Spielberg on my movie set.
Yeah, and for anyone's interested, you can read up on this. I don't want to necessarily harp on about it, but the Hollywood Reporter did print a letter from Spielberg to Hooper, basically saying like, "Hey, if some of my comments about me really directing Poltergeist were taken out of context, what I really meant to say was we had this unique creative relationship." Where we were collaborating on the movie, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the process. Blah 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 blah. Basically, kind of backpedaling some of his more inflammatory comments about Hooper, and basically saying like, "We worked together, man." Which, like I think we've discussed on this episode, is probably the case, and I totally don't care at this point. But right. there is a lot to read up on about that. If anyone is at all interested, I would argue that it makes Poltergeist a less interesting movie, and I would go ahead and just watch Poltergeist for what it is, then worry about any of that. And if our discussion of the first movie has not reinvigorated you to go check out this film again, then we haven't done our jobs. But I think we have done our jobs, so I hope that people check out Poltergeist and revisit it as soon as possible. And after this short break for some sponsors' comments and for me to go grab another glass of water, Brad and I will return with Poltergeist 2 and 3.
That's the crazy thing when you talk about this stuff, is like the amount of energy you have to discover in yourself after you've committed to your daily activities is crazy.
Because do you still maintain a job, or
as of this last year? No, I don't. I write full time now, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, the idea of what I was doing beforehand was very challenging.
Yeah. No, and again, it's why, Kim's in marketing, right? And a lot of her friends are into the website, and they're into the show, and they like it, and they talk about it. And they all say, it would be great to make the After Movie Diner a thing. Why is the After Movie Diner, not a thing? It has so much...
I hate having that conversation with friends and family.
Right. And it's often just because, there's only so many hours in the week, and I only have so many energy cells. And I'm someone who's thankfully blessed with more energy than most, but still, it's when I have to work minimum 40 hours a week to pay rent and so on, it doesn't leave a lot of time for other stuff. And that's not me complaining. It's just in order
Facts.
in order to leave the like my friend Matt Farley, who was able to finally leave his day job in order to make music full time, he needed almost 3 years worth of a safety net before he could commit himself to doing that.
Yep, and that's what I did.
Yeah,
and it's draining quickly, John.
Right. So it's difficult. It's hard. But I mean, look, you are. If anyone deserves to go forward and make a big go in this business, it's you, because I'm constantly impressed by your output, sir.
Well, thank you.
And I mean that genuinely. And it's interesting because I feel like, not to put myself in your story at all.
Sure.
Just from a community of podcasting story. I'm a storyteller, so I like a linear, nice story. If there wasn't Profondo Cinema, which was this wonderfully scrappy, wonderfully personal, wonderfully loose show that was kind of just doing its own thing and hanging out by the fringes and putting episodes out when they wanted, and et cetera, there wouldn't have been the diner.
Right.
And everything that I wanted to do with the diner and everything that I tried to do. And then I feel not that, without me there wouldn't be Itmod. I don't mean that, but I just mean that
it was definitely a step in
if there's a baton to be passed, I feel like it's been passed to you, and you guys are even more polished and even more professional and even more moving it on to another level, which I love. I love seeing those. Because I feel like there's a community, whether it's Doug Tilley and Mo over in one corner and Profondo Cinema over in the other, and Itmod over here, and so on. And I'm sure if we were more kind of less selfish, we would sort of maybe pool our resources. I don't know whether it's selfishness, but there's we all cling to our identities in a weird way, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But
no, that's 100% true. And I think the challenge, especially with ItMod, is we have 5 people who work on ItMod, right?
Right.
5 personalities with 5 like energy levels at any given moment for devoting to the podcast, and that makes things like really challenging for taking it to the next level, which is one of the reasons why I broke off and did comic book couples counseling, so that it was just me and Lisa, and like everything around comic book couples counseling, all the decisions are just Brad and Lisa,
right?
And like it's pretty freeing.
Yeah, and also the fact that your writing is on
Film School Rejects,
or an already established website. You know, I think the other thing I come up against is obviously that I'm trying to do. Well, if I'm going to do any writing, it'll be on After Movie Diner. If I'm going to do a podcast, it'll be on After Movie Diner. If I'm going to have an interview, like it's all under one thing. And I've never sought to write for anywhere else. I've never sought. But all I meant is sort of, you see all these people, all these very creative, inventive, interesting people kind of all playing within the same sandpit, and we're all kind of friends, contemporaries, and colleagues with each other. Yeah. Yet you would sort of think in a weird way, well, then why don't we all just pick one site and all like, but for whatever reason, that wouldn't be creatively satisfying for any of us then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you.
But you see something like Ain't It Cool News, and their big success story was, let's all just dump our junk on this one platform.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you can't compare yourself to Ain't It Cool News. I mean, they came, like, you look at, like, Ain't It Cool News, you look at Slash Film, you look at Film School Rejects, you look at all these sites. I mean, these are guys who started doing it at the beginning of things, and they're the ones that survived.
Right.
It's very hard to be like, okay, well, I'm launching the In the Mouth of Darkness website, and good fucking luck to us, man.
Yeah, no, I know. But at the same time, if not that they ever would, but like if Collider or Bloody Disgusting or someone came calling, I couldn't work for either of the. Like, I see all of those Collider and Bloody Disgusting, especially because I get so sick and tired of their clickbait crap. But I see them all going. When I grew up, I used to read Empire, Total Film, Hot Dog, Sight and Sound.
Same.
They were all like the 4 magazines in Britain, and occasionally Premiere if I got like an American. If I was at the airport and they had like an American magazine there, I would read Premiere. But Empire and Total Film, which are about the only 2 that are still going, for the last 15, 20 years, it's all been whatever the latest enormous fucking movie is on the front cover, because in order to pay for the magazine, they have to have the middle magazine spread that's going to cover the latest X-Men movie, even though them as film journalists know that the latest X-Men movie isn't worth covering.
Garbage. So frustrating.
The nice thing I try to tell myself about After Movie Diner is, even though we have our smaller readership, I can at least publish whatever the fuck I want.
That's a fact. Yeah.
That's the thing I like. Sleep well. One time we can cover, Herzog or something, and then the next moment we can cover, Bimbos in Space 8 or something. And it just that's what I tell myself, that it gives myself the I may struggle in obscurity, but it gives me the freedom. Anyway, all right, Chief, let us go
Poltergeist 2, the other side.
And why don't you give us the rundown this time of what is going on in the world of the Freeling family?
All right. Shall I start? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I can start. So what? It's like it takes place a year after the first Poltergeist incident. They have fled the neighborhood, and it has left them not in such a great state. The family, the Freeling family, they're making ends meet. But, Craig T. Nelson, his job is gone. They've had to relocate to, where is it? Arizona, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And they're living with Grandma Jess. So that baby boomer American dream is over. And they've gotten rid of all the television sets because they don't want the poltergeists to come out through the TV again. But sadly, a rumbling has occurred. And Zelda Rubinstein has heard that the violence is coming back. The beast is coming back.
Yeah.
And she has sent Taylor, her Native American shaman friend, to protect the family.
Yes. Poltergeist 2. It's the same movie, only this time we have a Native American.
Yeah. And it's called Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. And, when you have the other side, one of the most interesting aspects of the original film is that, Jo Beth Williams goes through the portal. She experiences whatever goes on in Poltergeist land, and she survives, and she brings Carol Ann back. And so now you're calling it Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. I want to see the other side.
Right.
And the whole movie, I'm just waiting. Give me the other side. Give me the other side. Give me the other side. And thankfully, we do get it, but it takes maybe a little too long for me to see the other side.
But when you see the other side,
it's so good.
Is it though?
I love it.
What, the bit at the end? The very end?
I love that bit at the end.
With the family all floating together? And
I love it. It's ridiculous. But you have that crazy H.R. Giger looking thing.
Right, no, that I love, yeah.
I like it. It's super cheesy. It's not at all in the realm of quality of the first film. No. But as B-movie silliness, I love the other side once they get there.
Well, it always reminds me of the storm that Kirk flies the Enterprise into at the end of Wrath of Khan. It's just a random orange-pink floaty thing in space.
And there's light shining from corners.
It's great. And then Grandma comes out like a floaty angel with the
love it.
Yeah.
I wanted the whole movie to take place in that ridiculous realm.
Yeah, in that cotton candy floaty. We couldn't think of anything else. Landscape. So this one is a little bizarre because I think it maintains the level of set pieces. There are 2 or 3 really great set pieces in the movie that definitely make this worth watching. Even though it is not as good as the first movie. First of all,
no.
But there are, I would say, 3 or 4 standout scenes that make it definitely worth a watch. And the introduction of Kane is good. He's definitely a creepy presence. Although, again, in much the kind of, they used real skeletons. I can't believe they used a real cancer patient to play the movie. They're who's dying horribly of a disease that's eating away at his body?
Yeah,
get him for the movie.
Julian Beck is super creepy.
Yes.
And that sequence when he first comes to the door and introduces himself to the Freeling family is unnerving, and I think in a lot of ways is the highlight of the film for me, that performance that he's giving in the screen door. I love the set pieces, I love the braces, I love the mezcal worm that Craig T. Nelson vomits up, but I love Julian Beck's performance.
I love the chainsaw attack in the garage at the end. I absolutely really enjoy that. I think it's a really well put together nutso set piece. I got a ton of enjoyment out of this movie. I think weirdly, where it falls down, if at all, is essentially in its pacing. It doesn't rollick along like the first one does in any way at all. Secondly, in it's adding mythology to it.
And all that's bad.
Yeah, agree. Well, yeah, and then they triple down on the mythology in the third one, and it almost derails it. But I agree. They couldn't have done a movie where they moved home, got out of that complex, blah, 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 only to find out, we're living on another burial ground. I get it. They couldn't have done that film. But the idea of there's this Reverend Kane, and he has all these followers who all died, and now only this little girl can lead them into the light, and they can be at rest, and like all that kind of stuff starts to kind of, to me,
I mean, it's cheap.
Yeah, it just overweighs the film in some regard. I don't know why, it just weighs it down. I'm like, I'm not that interested in it, I think.
It's fascinating to me that, Poltergeist comes out. It does quite well at the box office. It becomes, a cultural phenomenon, as we were saying. And they go ahead and they grab this guy, Brian Gibson, to direct the film, who's, he's done some respectable, music video work. He's done videos for Styx and Foreigner and bands like that.
Yeah.
And this is his first, coming out party. So, this could have been the start of a brilliant career. He did go on to direct Still Crazy, which is a movie I love.
Yeah.
But it feels like a jobber, right? It's they need a sequel because the money demands that we make a sequel, but we don't have Spielberg on set every day now. His energy is gone. We're not going to bring Tobe Hooper back for this thing. We're going to get the cast, but we're not going to give you as much money, and we want you to hit all the beats that you did before. It is like a classic, cliched 80s sequel.
Yeah, and it also seems odd that there is, there's 4 years release between the two films, so you can estimate probably about 3 or 4 years probably between the production of both films. I think this started shooting in 85 and comes out in 86. And yet number 3 comes out almost back to back with number 2. It's fairly unique in the sense that all the cast come back. You expect...
Yeah, the whole family, yeah.
Yeah, you expect, in number 3, where they go, well, we'll just bring back the daughter and the crazy old woman. You expect that to some extent. But in part 2, to bring back absolutely everyone 3 years later, at a time where you feel that 3 years down the line, unless you're Friday the 13th or something, Hollywood's all but forgotten. Who cares? You know what I mean? Unless you're Indiana Jones unless you're some big franchise that's kind of rolling on, who's showing up again to play the dad in a Poltergeist movie?
Yeah, it is strange. I'm surprised that they didn't go the route of Poltergeist infects an entirely new family.
Right. It's weird that they tripled down on Heather O'Rourke when, yes, she's a creepy-looking Village of the Damned style child, but ultimately, spit and hit a creepy-looking Village of the Damned style child. She's not, if you look at the children Spielberg works with in E.T., she's not a patch on any of them in terms of acting-wise. No. And that only becomes more apparent the more films she has to carry, sadly. But so it's interesting they get everyone back. The whole family is back. That's novelty value. As we say, there's some great set pieces that are genuinely worth it. There's a Native American, so people who like that addition for no apparent reason, that's there. He can come and wave his medicine pouch around or whatever in order to whatever. There's the tall, spindly Julian Beck, which I feel like is the Pennywise of this franchise, meaning he's the face that kids are going to be haunted by and talk about the next day at school.
Right, and when I was thinking back on the Poltergeist films before I rewatched the first one, I thought he was in all 3.
Yes, definitely. I know exactly what you mean. That face, his teeth, the presence definitely overshadows, or not overshadow, but just casts a shadow over these films and is very iconic. As I said, there's a pacing issue. As I said, the mythology does not excite or interest in quite the same way. It certainly doesn't have any of the social commentary or intelligence of the first one in the way that we were discussing before. And I think, like you say, it feels, if this was a straight-to-video sequel, you'd be fine with it.
Sure.
But it being essentially, a big a blockbuster follow-up to a sort of blockbuster horror movie, it feels lackluster. And it seems odd that you would go to all this trouble and you wouldn't knock on, oh, Hooper doesn't want to do it, which, by the way, Hooper would totally have come back in 1985 to have made this movie for a paycheck, considering some of the canon stuff he was doing at the time. But you couldn't have gone and knocked on, I don't know, a couple of other people's doors. I'm trying to think, but I don't know, fucking give it to Romero or something. Like, give it to someone who's doing something in '85 that.
Well, I mean, I think they just wanted to knock something out, and I think they're just checking boxes, and every creative person that was involved in the first movie is too busy doing something else at this point. I mean, I think probably you're right. Hooper would have come back, but they probably would have had to have paid him more than Brian Gibson.
Right. I mean,
the whole it's hard not to think that whatever the fallout of the relationship between Hooper and Spielberg on the first film, I would have been super surprised to have seen them work again on a sequel.
Yeah. And I sort of find it interesting, like, at one point they were going to make this in 3D. That you're like, they're just kind of scrabbling around. It doesn't feel organic. Like, the first one feels like it's written by someone with something to say and with someone who kind of has a grasp on inventive horror and has some tricks that they want to show off. This one has H.R. Geiger, but again, he's commissioned to create, like, the monsters and the creatures and stuff, but the direction and the film doesn't seemingly find a way to successfully show them off, in a way that would be, 30 years later. Super
it's laughable, but I still love that thing at the end, whatever the hell it is.
There are glimpses in this movie where you think to yourself, like, oh my God, the movie this could have been. You know what I mean? If you had got H.R. Geiger and the early form of K&B working together with, a Raimi or a Romero or someone up and coming who would eventually be like a master of horror, but like someone up and coming who maybe needs that guiding hand. And if Spielberg had kind of gone, sure, I'll shepherd another Masters of Horror to make a kind of, it would have been a great franchise for something like that, for Spielberg to kind of be like, okay, who else is out there making interesting pictures? I've done one with Hooper. Let's see if we can't get Romero to do this thing or Raimi to do this thing, or, pull some people together to make some interesting stuff.
I would say that there are a couple of creative individuals involved still, besides H.R. Giger that I really appreciate. Jerry Goldsmith is back for the score. I think the score is not as good as the first film, but it's pretty much doing what the first film did. And we didn't talk about it when we were talking about Poltergeist, but Jerry Goldsmith's score on Poltergeist is amazing.
Yes,
it is so good.
It is fantastic. And almost, again, another one of those instantly recognizable,
yes,
this is, in my blood somehow, and I don't quite know how kind of scores.
And the film is shot by Andrew Laszlo, who didn't shoot the first film, but he did shoot Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse, which I find fascinating. And he shot First Blood and, Streets of Fire, Remo Williams, Inner Space. My favorite Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. The film has a look. I don't think it's as strong as what was happening in the first Poltergeist, but there are moments of visual flourish that I really appreciate in Poltergeist 2. It just happens to be garbage.
Definitely. No, I mean, look, I think that definitely the Poltergeist trilogy, as it stands, has diminishing returns. But I think that on any given day, you could put one or two in and have tons of fun with either film. I think that the first one, if they just released the first one and they never released any other movies, the first one would be a great example of early 80s horror mastery and social commentary. As they did do two more, the sequel is, it's not bigger, brasher, bolder, better in the way of, you know, other horror sequels. You know, they don't go the Friday the 13th route of, like, with each progressive sequel becoming more and more over the top and ludicrous. They don't go the Evil Dead route of just stripping out everything that doesn't work and just throwing everything that does, you know, into a blender and ramping it up to 11. You know, they essentially kind of redo the first film with an addition of a tall, spindly guy. They throw in H.R. Geiger stuff in there to kind of be like, all right, let's see if we can't get some creative mileage out of that. And then, you know, the movie plays out, and there are, as we've said, like, enjoyable set pieces, and the cast is back. Like, there's stuff going for it, but ultimately, for whatever reason, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the weight and the depth of the first one. It doesn't need to, though, and I would argue that, like I say, any rainy afternoon, if you want to put on a haunting movie or an 80s horror, you could do a lot worse than these two films. And they're a ton of fun to watch back to back.
Yeah, I agree. I watched them back to back, and I had a good time with them. I would love to talk to the screenwriters, because it's the same guys who wrote the first movie. And I would love to be like, you know, what was that first day? We're like, okay, Poltergeist 2, go.
Right.
And I just imagine them going like,
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, right? Because, like I say, unless you do what you suggested and be like, a whole other family with a whole other dynamic gets attacked by a poltergeist. And to be fair, you could have done the one thing the poltergeist doesn't do is you could have done the wealth divide. You know what I mean? You could have had like a rich family and a poor family both get attacked at the same time or something. And kind of like how they have to, I'm just spitballing, but you know what I mean? Like, there's certain things you could have done in terms of social commentary and horror at the same time. But, you know, they stick with the same family, which is, you know, a brave choice. I suppose if you can get the cast back, then it you know, that is at least, like we say, a point of interest for the film. I just don't feel like the whole Kane storyline is fleshed out. So the fact that then the third one uses the Kane storyline again, I was a little like, really?
yeah. Especially since Julian Beck was dead by this point,
right? And
they had to go and find a new Kane, who's not as effective as Julian Beck.
No, I mean, let's just run down our sort of favorite moments in part 2 and then move on to part 3. For me, it's the vomit beast and the chainsaw attack sequence. They're kind of the two that stick out in my memory, and I only watched this last weekend. What about yourself, sir?
I mean, I really like the braces. I think that is a very unsettling idea of this young boy's braces turning against him. It's a little goofy.
The wires wrapping him up in the bathroom. Yeah.
But like, that is in the spirit of the first film, where, you know, it takes like a little spooky idea and then goes wild with it.
Yes.
And that works, you know, and then the brace is how they're like trying to reach for the electricity and try to electrocute them both.
Oh, yeah. No, I love that. You're reminding me now.
That.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And I love when they go to the other side and they're all floating around in there. Like it's so silly, but that's, you know, if you're going to call it Poltergeist 2, the other side, and if we're going to do this family again, I want to see that other side.
Yeah, I think that the concept of someone needs to be on the other side, someone needs to know on the other side or in reality that someone loves you or still loves you it's an interesting idea, because it's sort of playing with that fear of, when I die, will I be remembered? When I die, what's my legacy? Do people genuinely love me? Like, there's some idea there that could have been played with. I don't think it's ever examined in the way that I would have liked to have seen it, because it instead becomes like, instead of saying the magical words from the book of whatever that saves you from the demon, Instead, just say I love you a bunch and we'll all be happy and together. That's kind of how it's used, and it's sort of a bit of a letdown. Because you need a really good actor to convince me that you love each other, and I'm just not necessarily seeing that. No offense to Jo Beth Williams or
Grandma.
Grandma. Oh, no, I was thinking of when he gets... Craig T. Nelson gets the infected, possessed worm in him.
Oh, yeah.
And she has to, like, pull him out of the dark side or whatever.
Like, I like that scene as when Craig T. Nelson is... possessed by Cain through the worm. Like, that scene is extremely troubling and hard to watch. And there's a version of it which could have gone way darker, of course.
Yes. And what's
there's
interesting,
a real threat there.
Definitely. That's another really, like, spooky idea that they could have gone with, and I think that's why you jettison the Cain idea or whatever, or have Cain but don't have it, like, just have him that he's a tormented soul that's chasing after the girl who left the door open or whatever. I don't know, but the to the other dimension, because the idea of the family tearing itself apart from within, in other words, had they all got kind of possessed at some point, or had they used not the secrets or the lies, but had they used the things that families, friends, whoever, acquaintances, work colleagues, don't bring up, because they know that if you bring that up, it is going to cause pain to someone, or it's going to open a can of worms. Like I've said before, I've had friends in my life since I was 6 years old. You don't get to 40 without having some baggage in those friendships. But what you don't do in those friendships is you bring anything up, because if you bring it up, he's like, yeah, but there was that time when we were 20 that you did this. Yeah, but there was this time when you were 15 where you did this. There would be an interesting way, if the family got possessed, where you could have them bring up all these things that they're kind of sitting on and festering with. That doesn't ever really happen, unfortunately. And so I feel like, unlike Poltergeist 1, Poltergeist 2 leaves a lot of good potential ideas on the floor.
Yeah.
And luckily we get some great set pieces out of them, so I'm not attacking the film. But it's less interesting than it could have been, and I feel like there's sort of potential there for it to both be menacing and also emotionally problematic, because it adds weight to the whole we need to love each other to stick together and to get rid of the beast.
Yeah. Instead they bring in Taylor, and he's an unnecessary presence and an awkward presence in the film.
Right, and also you go, well, we know they love each other. They're this family that have gone through this incredible hardship and are still together. It doesn't add much. If he's possessed and then she's just like, but I love you, you're like, okay, great, she loves him. Like, I assume that because they're still together and they're still married and everything's fine. It would have added more weight to it had they started slinging a bit of old bad blood about or something, I think.
Yeah.
Just from a scripting point of view. But you're right. Now I'm thinking back to the braces thing. That is another phenomenally good idea. And another movie that I think was definitely inspired by this is on the list is something like a Ghostbusters. There's so many occasions in like Ghostbuster films or other films like them where something mundane or some
ordinary
becomes possessed or becomes a source of menace. And I really do think that like something like Poltergeist and Poltergeist 2 kind of have those ideas in them that other filmmakers, I think, either do better or expand upon. And I just think I would have liked... I think Poltergeist 2 lacks that substance. And, the H.R. Geiger thing, like he himself has said, I should have been on set more. I should have stuck around because they didn't use what I did well enough, and I didn't do what I should have done and spent more time with it and so on. So while he is a creative voice on the movie, clearly he built a bunch of stuff and went, do that, and then left. That would be like Tom Savini showing up on the first day of Friday the 13th and being like, here's a few severed arms, now leave me alone.
Well, like the deal with Geiger was he would not travel, right? Like he would not get on a plane. I think that's kind of hilarious because his big takeaway from the whole event was, I probably should have been on set.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, you can't... and the reason why I use the Tom Savini thing is I was watching a documentary last night, but we all know the famous story of the end of Friday the 13th basically being Savini's idea. If you don't have a creative on set, immersed in your film, you don't allow for those kind of things to happen, is kind of what I'm saying. And so the first one benefits from these two incredibly creative forces, and the second one feels like, sure, there's some creativity around, but it's not necessarily conflicting and building upon itself to the best of its ability. And would you be in agreement, sir? Do you have any more points on part 2?
No, I think that's it. I want to get to 3.
Let's get to 3. As I said before, the case of diminishing returns hits the Poltergeist franchise like a brick at this point. While on the surface and from the movie's poster, you would think, oh my God, this time it's a skyscraper. You would go, think of the potential of a haunted skyscraper, when you realize that all they have is one corridor, half an apartment, and a few mirrors. You realize that actually you're probably... Oh, and a parking garage. You're probably not in for the skyscraper.
There's some swimming pool. There's a swimming pool.
Yeah, there's a swimming pool. There's also way too many teenagers in this film for anyone to give a shit about. Oh, but the one thing that does run through part 2 and part 3 that you mentioned very briefly about Craig T. Nelson when he gets possessed, that actors in part 2 and part 3 not very good at just playing average people, but when the actors get the chance to be like weird and possessed, they suddenly like come out of themselves, and that is true in like both part 2 and part 3. I'm much more interested in the actors when they're possessed and doing weird shit than I am when they're attempting to be normal.
3 is not good.
No,
but I there are moments that I enjoy. Like 3 is everything that, like at the end of part 2, we go to the other side and we're in full B movie trash, like get it done time cinema. And that's what all of 3 is. It's super low budget. It's everyone working on it is a jobber. And they just need to finish a film and get it out and reap the benefits of it financially. But
which they don't, because it makes hardly any money.
It does. It does terrible. Yeah. But Tom Skerrit is a charismatic presence, even in this movie. And I love Nancy Allen as the aunt who kind of hates Carol Ann being there, and that her husband has to be the defender of Carol Ann. I like that dynamic. Why Carol Ann is in Chicago with her aunt, I do not understand.
No. And whoever thought that Richard Fire should have been in this film?
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ. I cannot even... Yes.
I had completely erased him from my brain.
I wish someone had completely erased him from this film.
I mean, I'm already in the process of trying to get that done. Like when we finish this podcast, he is going out again.
Yes.
But his performance in this film is insane, matched with his character insisting that Carol Ann is a mistress of mass hypnosis.
Right.
And that he can witness the most absurd things in front of him, like cups being thrown at glasses, mirrors, and
by zombie hands,
zombie hands, and go like, she tricked me with mass hypnosis.
Right.
If that's the case, dude, you still have a wizard in your presence, and you need to be careful.
Right. Well, you see, the problem is the whole through line of is this or isn't this real that Dr. Seaton essentially sets up only works, right, if first of all, Dr. Seaton is played by anyone other than Richard Pryor. But secondly, again, this is the other problem with bringing back the same people. If Carol Ann, or a character who is claiming demon possession or ghost possession or whatever, if a character is charismatic enough, interesting enough, and possibly duplicitous enough to make the audience question. Like, if you had cast anyone other than Heather O'Rourke as Carol Ann and set this, let's say, 5 years into the future, so you could have cast like an older actress, like a teen actress maybe, and if you had the Doctor saying, I've been working with this girl and actually I've noticed some cracks in her stories and blah, 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 and formulated the whole movie around this idea of, well, actually, did Poltergeist 1 and 2 happen? Or is it all the machinations of this, like, conniving teenage witch? That would have been a great movie. That's not the film we get, but I think it's the film they had the idea of. But
I'm amazed that they did not jump her in age and cast a teen actor, because clearly they're interested in the Friday the 13th dynamic where we surround the camera with teen presence. And
oh
the fact
God,
that
I wish they weren't.
But like, it should have been like Laura Flynn Boyle's movie and not Heather O'Rourke's film. Not to say that she's much better, but like it's absurd to me that we're still hanging out with Carol Ann in this storyline.
Right, and it's absurd to me that about 58 pages of this script is literally characters saying other characters' names over and over again. Carol Ann. There's a sequence where Nancy Allen walks through a room, says Carol Ann 4 times, then says Bruce 3 times, then says Donna twice, then says the mystic's name, what's her name, Zelda or whatever her name is, Tangina, twice. Yeah. And I'm like, it's just an actress literally walking through a bedroom saying names out loud. And I wouldn't mind, but it comes off the back of 15 minutes of Tom Skerrit running around an office building saying names out loud. Yeah, I'm like, stop saying people's names.
There is so much wasted space in this film. Like, they are just stretching time, like wandering this house or this skyscraper. And it should be like Poltergeist Die Hard, but it's 3 sets and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's really claustrophobic and extremely boring.
Yeah. And it's the mirror idea is a neat idea. But
Great
then
idea.
It's the whole idea. Like, instead of it being just one in an arsenal of, like, awesome ideas, it's endlessly repeated to the point where you go, I get it, all right. And it's also, like, a really difficult gag to pull off because you have to have 2 actors, one playing the back of someone and one playing the other one, and if they don't exactly line up, you can tell. And there's this horrible moment where Kane is meant to be poking his head out of a door multiple times, so you're meant to see like 8 or 9 Kanes down this corridor, but they don't even hire the same height actors. So like one's a dwarf and one's 6 foot and one's 5 foot. Like it's ridiculous. They haven't even got the same wigs. I mean, how hard is it to buy 5 wigs, 5 hats, 5 coats, and get 5 people who are all 6 foot? Like how hard is that?
That sequence when the doors start to open and everybody's a different height.
Like, what is
that? That is parody level bad.
Yeah, that's like Charles Band level, Full Moon, not even Full Moon in the 90s, Full Moon made for his streaming channel in the 2000s level.
It's rough. It's rough.
It is really rough. And, so there was moments like that where I'm like, really? Then they're all standing around saying each other's names. Then there's this sequence where we care that they're going downstairs to a art exhibit and people are like worried about like, well, will the artist show up and will this happen? I'm like, nobody cares about any of this. Then there's this whole teenager group which they seemingly think that we're interested in, but nobody could be interested in any of these fatuous people. I mean, even the teenagers in Friday the 13th at least have individual characters. This is just a wash of terrible people.
Depends on the Friday the 13th movie.
Well,
like the scene with Scott the boyfriend when he goes into the pool and he comes out and he's covered in ectoplasm.
Yes.
That foam, and he's talking to Tom Skerrit. Like, I like the imagery of that brief moment.
I was just angry, though. How do you have a bunch of annoying teenagers in a swimming pool in a possessed high-rise and you don't boil the swimming pool? Like, that's the scene you do, right? The swimming pool boils, they can't get out in time, and they all die horrible deaths with their skin flapping off. That's the scene I want to see in this movie, and it doesn't happen. Instead, they get a slight scolding in a gymnasium and go back to their parents. It's like, what?
I mean, what happens in this film? You know, like, Kane shows up, he scares some people, and everybody pretty much just goes back to their daily life. Like, there is no real ending. There is no real arc to these characters.
No, and I think that the biggest problem is that the movie seems to think the story is we're all skeptical until the very end, where even not only someone who's skeptical, Nancy Allen, but also someone who just outright fucking hates her niece, apparently.
Yeah, she's evil. evil aunt.
She has to suddenly acknowledge to herself that she genuinely loves her niece. That seems to be the character arc everyone's interested in this story. Like I said before, though, the only way to gain any real weight to that from a scripting standpoint is to cast doubt in the minds of the audience. And the trouble is, if you're going to have the same Heather O'Rourke playing the character at the same age, being exactly the same person, you can only assume that the first two films were real, and therefore the third one is real, and therefore it takes away any of the mystery of is she or isn't she? And it's not helped by the fact that the guy who presents the skeptical analysis, Richard Fire, is so awful and so bad, and is wearing a sweater that makes people want to stab him in the face. That it totally derails, I think, what they think the core of this movie is, which is is she or isn't she? And I just think it's a shame, because I think that's a really great idea. Where do you go with part 3? Well, you set it in a bigger building, great, except that you have half the money to do that in, which is a problem. But you set it in a bigger building, and you cast doubt on everything that's happened up until now. That would be a really good movie. Sadly, it's not the film we get. But what are the bits that you like about it?
The Tangina sequence where Lara Flynn Boyle comes out of her corpse.
Yes, that's a great
she,
sequence.
Rips through her body. Like, the practical effect of that is pretty cool. And, you know, honestly, like, on a practical effect thing, I know we were just ripping a new one to all the mirror stuff, but I do like watching all of that stuff get done in camera. There are not many optical effects. Most of the stuff is happening in camera, and that's fun to witness, but I'm really stretching to find good things. I like the pool thing with Scott and the bubbles and the ectoplasm, and I like the Zelda Rubinstein corpse situation.
Yeah, it's just, it has the failing of all, or it has the failing of a lot of low budget pictures, which is because they think they have this idea that doing effects or doing a set piece is expensive. So therefore, in order to pad out the time of our movie, let's spend time with the teenagers being like, all right, we have to go to the security office. We have to turn back the tape. I have to press this over here and put that over there while the security guy goes over here. Then we have to run down and get snacks. Like, they waste time with all this stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, no, you can have a low budget movie that doesn't have to have a, stomach ripping sequence every 5 minutes, but could have a legitimately, like, strong backbone of an idea and some characters in there that doesn't need to waste time with a bunch of superfluous characters that you're not able to write very well anyway. Like, there's so many of these. I see these low budget films all the time where you're like, why do you think that all we want is, 20 minutes of garbage in between 30 seconds of thrill. Like, there's a way to write that 20 minutes that you have to pad out your film because you don't have the money to do the thrill ride every 10 minutes. There's a way to do that without it costing you very much at all. Two people in a room can be compelling if you write it well. Like, anyway.
And I don't think that this movie, like, visually looks as interesting as either of the previous two films. But as a cinematographer nut, I do have to highlight the guy who worked on this movie. I'm going to butcher his last name. He's a Russian guy named Alex Nepomniachtchi. And he's the guy who shot the Rutger Hauer film Wanted, Dead or Alive, which I like quite a bit.
Yeah.
But he went on and he shot Never Been Kissed, the Drew Barrymore film.
Wow.
He shot Julianne Moore and Todd Haynes in Safe, and he shot Narc, the Ray Liotta movie.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's quite a diverse resume.
It's a wild resume, and he mostly does like TV. Like he's the guy who shot the last season of Gilmore Girls on Netflix, and he shoots a bunch of The Americans and Blue Bloods. But he got his start on a Beirut documentary, a Rutger Hauer film, and Poltergeist 3.
Wow. And he works for Gary Sherman doing Wanted, Dead or Alive.
Yeah. Gary Sherman. Yeah.
And Gary Sherman, who I'm suddenly realizing that I've actually met.
Met Gary Sherman?
I did not realize this. He was at a screening of Raw Meat. When Blue Underground re-released it on Blu-ray, the erstwhile Uncle Bill, William Lustig, and Gary Sherman came to a little basement theater in New York and screened the new Raw Meat Blu-ray and did questions afterwards. So, yes, I've actually met Sherman because obviously Raw Meat, it's a Donald Pleasance movie.
Yeah.
It also features Christopher Lee, and it's wonderful.
He's directed a bunch of great movies or movies that I really enjoy, Raw Meat and Vice Squad and Dead and Buried.
Oh, my God. Vice Squad is so sleazy. Like, that's a wonderful sleaze-tastic film.
But Poltergeist 3 is not as good as any of those.
No, not at all. My God, I wish we were talking about Wings Hauser and Vice Squad now.
Yeah.
That's such a fun movie. I just picked that up recently randomly on VHS. Believe it or not, I found Vice Squad on a big box VHS, so I picked that up because I couldn't resist it. Dead and Buried is one of those that like people keep telling me. I used to see it in video stores all the time.
Sure.
People keep telling me to watch it. I've never got around to it. That is one that I need to probably check out. But yeah, what a bonkers resume to do Raw Meat, Dead and Buried, Vice Squad, and Wanted, Dead or Alive, and then Poltergeist 3. That's just such a weird.
Yep. Well, wow. I mean, if you talk to him, apparently he will tell you that Poltergeist 3 is without a doubt his least favorite film of his own filmography.
Yes, I'm sure. I did not realize it was the same Gary Sherman. Look at me not doing my research for this episode. I just presumed that Brad, the knowledge Gullickson, would show up with all these.
Well, Heather O'Rourke did pass away towards the end of filming of this movie, and they reshot the whole ending of the film using a stunt person, a stunt child in her role. So it would be interesting to know what that first ending would look like, what Poltergeist 3, how that would have ended if Heather O'Rourke hadn't passed away. But probably not that much better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whose idea it was to maintain the Kane thing. Yeah, that's really what derails it. I mean, I don't want to just relentlessly pick it apart, even though we have done. But I just mean, like, in general, I wonder who was like, well, I guess we're doing that again. I'm like, well, but why? Like, you don't have to.
I mean, the imagery from the other side was very striking. Like the preacher character, it was very, very scary. And a lot of that had to do with the actors' physical health and feels exploitative of that. So when they try to do it again in 3 and they don't have an actor who's near death, it really doesn't have the effect of the second film at all. And so even attempting to do it was probably a mistake.
Yeah, I don't see how it plays into the whole is she or isn't she really doing, like, the whole subplot about is she or isn't she really seeing this stuff doesn't help if you have the Kane storyline. Like, it needs to kind of pick one and focus on it. So I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it just, the endless repetitive, go into the light, and the endless calling of Carol Ann's name and everything just sort of bogs this down. And it's a shame because, like you say, there's some neat ideas in it. Lara Flynn Boyle crawling out of Tangina's body is fun and gross. When Lara Flynn Boyle and Kipley Wentz get possessed, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And Tom Skerrit and Nancy Allen. The cast is very starry. They're great. But like Tom Skerrit is reduced to like sitting in the corner of a party, smoking a cigarette, or running around a corridor calling out the same name 100 times. And you're just like, you've got Tom Skerrit, Nancy Allen, for the love of Christ, do something with them. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a bit of a shame. Because again, like, how much does it cost to get some monofilament and a few chairs flying around? Like, even if you did that, that would be something, But no, sadly not. The case of diminishing returns hits the Poltergeist franchise, which means I guess this Poltergeist podcast ends on a squib rather than a celebratory huzzah. But I would say this, having revisited the trilogy back to back, and having seen 3 for the first time, and having put it all together, and with a bit of hindsight and distance, I still maintain what I said about the first one. I think these films are ripe for rediscovery. There are other movies out there in the ether that people put across very, very hard that are way shittier than these films. The fact that we just got Puppet Master 15 or whatever it was, but people aren't talking about Poltergeist kind of blows my mind a little bit. So I would urge people to rediscover Poltergeist. What say you,
certainly
Brad?
the first movie. Certainly the first movie. Like that is exceptional ghost storytelling. Like the haunting storytelling. That's. We throw so much love at the The Conjuring, and
people throw love at the Changeling as well. And I like the Changeling; it's fantastic, but it's also has a lot of issues with it as well in terms of entertainment.
I'm not ready to have this conversation with you, John. I'll tell you right now that I certainly prefer the Changeling to Poltergeist. I love the Changeling.
Oh, I love the Changeling too. I mean, but again, it's one of those movies that if you even come close to saying anything about it, people get touchy. And,
just like I did now.
and that's fine. That's fine. And I'm not about to be a changeling dumper or whatever.
Poltergeist is a very basic ghost story, right? Like you've seen this plot many, many times, and it's replicated every year in a series of horror films, whether it's coming from the studios or like Blumhouse or something like that. Like, this is a plot that you see a lot, and I think it's done best in Poltergeist.
I agree. I do definitely agree, and I think that if I put these movies over at all, it's because they are good fun. Poltergeist has a little bit of depth to it, which is nice to discuss and nice to look back on from a kind of Reagan-era 80s thing. But in general, these are just good fun movies with probably more effects than most people remember. More effects and more gore than most people remember. And I think that gives them cachet even today. Especially fans of practical effects should definitely watch the first and second ones. And I think I came away from the trilogy just being surprised how little I see said about the movies, only because you and I live on social media quite a lot because of our various creative endeavors. And so we see the same stuff being talked about time and time and time again. And I often wonder, like, that's nice, but why don't we throw in a couple of other things? And that's kind of where the After Movie Diner lives. If I can, dig out a cult classic that someone isn't talking about as vocally as they might, then it's always nice. And I feel like that's why I was so excited to do this trilogy, and why I've enjoyed this discussion so much.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I would certainly recommend 1 and 2. I don't know I could recommend 3 in good conscience, but if you're watching 1 and 2, you might as well watch 3, right? I think that's how it works.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'm not necessarily talking to someone with like a... I'm talking to people who... And the reason why I brought up Puppet Master 15 or whatever, like, if you're on a horror fan group and you're talking passionately about Puppet Master, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be, it's fine. But if you're talking about, like, those kind of films, or you're talking about... Evil Dead or whatever it is, like, I don't know, like, pick out your, like, weird, bizarro 80s franchise of choice. All I'm saying is that's wonderful, love what you love, but also save some space for Poltergeist, because I think it will surprise. I think that's where I'm coming from. Rather than just saying to anybody, some average schmo who just watches movies, go watch Poltergeist. I'm not sure. I'm more comparing it to the stuff people do talk about. I'm surprised that
Sure.
if that makes any sense.
I understand what you're saying. I was surprised by how many people, when I shared your tweet on my feed, how many people have really strong opinions about Poltergeist. So for as much
you got some comments and things on Twitter? I didn't see that.
Oh, I did. I have 14 replies to your tweet on my feed. It's definitely sparked a lot of passion that I was surprised to see. So there are some diehards out there.
Nice.
I'll shout out to Aaron Prescott and Sean Eastridge and Shara Valentine and Dan Fleming and Lisa Bell Roden and Andy Geierson and Tom Monk and
Christopher
Monty
Campbell,
Taylor,
it looks like.
Christopher Campbell, Jacob Trussell, like lots and lots of people. Charlie Brigden, he agrees that the score is he calls the Jerry Goldsmith score the all-time greatest horror score. So, like, a lot of passion for this film.
Nice
but
to see it.
That's not to say that what we were saying earlier is not true, because you do not hear people bringing up Poltergeist on the reg.
Indeed. And I liked Andy's comment, Tom fucking Skerrit, fight me. And then Tom Monk comes back with, that's half a movie, Andy, and you know it. But Tom Skerrit is 100% stash. That's a Skerrit, Sam Elliott movie. That would be. Can you imagine that?
I can't.
As like Tash Brothers, that would be amazing. But yes, wow, what responses you got? Incredible, some excellent comments. So hopefully they all listen to this show, and they all enjoy what we've been talking about. Apparently, Tom though is going to be upset that we didn't just go on and on about Tom Skerrit.
Tom Skerrit is great. But this is not the Tom Skerrit movie you watch, right? No.
Although Tom Skerrit for an American-style James Bond, just in the way he fills out that tuxedo, I'm just going to put that out there. I wanted to see Tom Skerrit in that tuxedo fighting Kane on a rooftop. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, like I said, like I appreciated that his role was not the typical uncle role. I like that he was the warm character and Nancy Allen was the evil aunt. But again, they didn't really do anything with it.
They are definitely the two best things in part 3. Tom Skerritt and Nancy Allen, and the dynamic of them. It is very unusual that he would be so accepting and she would be so quick to throw her under the bus. And that's a genuinely interesting thing in part 3. There's a positive thing to end on, Brad.
Good.
All right, man. Well, look, thank you ever so much. This has been a behemoth of a show, but I love big shows. I don't tend to do long shows anymore, so I fucking love it. And anyone who's made it to the end, congratulations.
Well, that's what I do. You invite me on, and I am going to ramble.
No, dude, I loved it. I loved it. Are you kidding? We had a great conversation. It was fantastic. And it was also nice to just kind of catch up.
Yeah.
Our schedules do not allow much of that, so it's awesome that we got to do that. And like I say, I still have an open invite if you want to do the 5th part of Halloween, Friday, and Nightmare.
I love that idea, and I really want to make that happen. And Lisa and I will confer, and we'll figure out how to do it. So you're looking at like a record of the latter half of October?
Yes, that could certainly be a month from now if you needed time. Definitely,
I think we can make that work.
So that would be an awesome episode. And likewise, we've got Ninja Vember coming up. So don't be shy. If you need to be a part of the show, just hit me up.
All right,
we'll make it happen. All right, man. Well, look, thanks ever so much again. I will put the links to where people can find you in the episode description. And as I say, you're welcome back anytime, and send all my best to your incredibly talented wife.
Will do.
All right,
John. Take care.
Cool, man. Take care. Bye now. So you're the 1, 2, the 1.